The brush in her bare, red-numbed hand moved once, twice, 3 times across the dried blackcurrant stain on the broad York stone flagstone. The water in the wooden bucket beside her right knee was cold to the bone, and the iron rim had begun to glaze with a thin white frost. She dipped the brush again and pressed it against the stone and worked the bristles into the seam where the stain had set deepest in October when a careless tray had tipped. The frost-bound flag bit through the thin, coarse, charcoal-grey wool of her gown at the knee. Her breath stood in slow white plumes about her face. The cold black December sky was iron over the back court of Stannersley Hall in the West Riding of Yorkshire on the still, frost-stricken morning of Saturday the 14th of December, 1816, at 5:30 before dawn. There was no moon. A single oil lamp burned dim and yellow in the kitchen window above her shoulder, and nothing else gave her light. Far off in the home wood, a fox barked once and was answered, and was silent. The pump handle by the back court wall stood iced over and motionless, its mouth glazed white where the last bucket had spilled. Her white linen apron was soiled and spotted with the night's labour. Her wooden patten on her right foot was pulled half off where she had knelt. The soiled white linen housemaid's cap upon her hair had slipped a little to the left, and a small puff of breath plumed from her quiet, composed mouth. She did not lift her head when the soft sound of a man's boot fell upon the stable yard gravel beyond the back court arch, because she did not, at first, hear it. The brush had a small dragging sound upon the stone, and the water in the bucket plashed when she dipped, and her own breathing was thicker than it should be for 5:30 in the morning. The boot came one step nearer. It paused at the back court arch. She raised her head. A gentleman stood under the broad stone arch that gave from the stable yard upon the back court, his shoulders squared against the iron sky behind, and his form set very still. He was tall, 6 feet and 2 inches, lean and broad-shouldered, 33. His hair was thick, deep black, wavy hair, pure black with dark blue lights cut close at the nape and brushing the collar of his coat, with one premature streak of pure silver above the right temple, and one lock fallen across his brow from the half-hour's walk against the wind. His eyes, settled on her where she knelt, were clear, cool storm grey, true cool slate grey of the colour of a winter Yorkshire moor under cloud, with flecks of dark gold. His skin was fair, faintly weathered from years at Madras, with a faint shadow at his clean-shaven jaw, and a small thin pale scar across the right eyebrow where, in 1812, a teak stare had given under his boot. His face was a strong, angular face, the mouth firm and grave, and at the right corner of the lower lip, a small dark mole. He wore a dark charcoal superfine country travel coat over a plain, dark grey wool greatcoat with a double cape, a buff waistcoat with small silver buttons, buff breeches, brown-topped boots of soft leather, a white cravat properly tied. Upon his right hand, the heavy silver Stannersley signet, a stag's head over a stone bridge, caught what dim light there was. In his right hand, he held a plain, dark brown beaver hat. He had not, in his half-hour's walk through the home park, expected to find the back court arch open, or a young woman of clear genteel carriage upon her hands and knees scrubbing his late uncle's flagstones. She was Lady Hermione Marchmont, 23, only daughter of the late Captain Edmund Marchmont of His Majesty's Royal Navy, dead at Trafalgar in 1805, and of the late Mrs. Edith Marchmont, dead of a fever in the spring of 1813, niece of the late 7th Earl of Stannersley, in whose house she had lived 3.5 years, and worked, on the housekeeper's settled view of genteel kinship without portion, as a maid of all work in the back court, the laundry, the still-room, and the kitchen. He was Cassander Edmund Halford, 8th Earl of Stannersley, who had taken the late coach from London on the Friday afternoon, arrived at the village inn at 11:30 on the Friday night, slept 4 hours, and walked across the home park in the iron dark of 5:30 on this Saturday morning of the 14th of December, 1816, that he might enter his new house indoors before any servant should yet be stirring. She rose. She did so with the grace which kneeling 3½ years had not been able to put down, standing slowly to her full slender 5 feet and 5 inches upright. The wooden patten slipped, and she steadied it. The brush hung in her right hand at her side. Her long, rich, dark, honey-blonde, wavy hair, deep, warm, honey-blonde with ash-gold lights, was pinned smooth in a low chignon at the nape, with small wisps escaped at the temples. The soiled white linen housemaid's cap was pinned plain over it. Her eyes, lifted now to his, were clear, cool sea-green eyes, deep cool sea-green with flecks of dark gold, set under finely arched, dark honey-brown brows and shadowed by thick dark lashes, very steady. Her skin was ivory-fair English skin, reddened a little at the knuckles, with a faint scattering of pale freckles across the bridge of her nose, and a small natural beauty mark just below the left corner of the lower lip. Her oval face was delicate and fine in feature. The soft, well-shaped mouth held at composed quiet, the long graceful neck rising from the high round collar of the plain, coarse charcoal grey wool-maid's morning gown with long sleeves. Over the gown hung the soiled white linen apron, and her plain coarse black wool stockings showed a 1/2 inch above the wooden patten on her plain leather shoes. She wore no jewellery. She held herself, as she had ever held herself, very still. He came 1 step further under the arch, and stood, and asked her, in a deep, clear, quiet baritone that the iron air did not roughen, "Will you tell me your name?" She inclined her head, the smallest courteous inclination, and answered him in a soft, warm low, alto-pitched at no more than the bucket between them needed. "Hermione Marchmont, my lord." He did not speak at once. The lamp in the kitchen window guttered a little upon its wick. He looked down at her bare, red-numbed hand upon the brush, and at the wooden bucket with its frost-glazed iron rim, and his clear, cool, storm-grey eyes settled. He came forward without haste, and bent, and took the brush from her hand. He set the bucket aside against the back court wall by the iced pump. "Will you stand a moment longer, Lady Hermione?" he said, "and come indoors with me?" She stood. She came. He did not give her his arm. He understood that her hand was too cold and her sleeve too soiled for any common civility of that kind, and that the offer would have shamed her. He merely walked 1/2 pace before her, holding the brush yet in his gloved right hand, and led her across the back court to the back door of the kitchen passage. The door yielded. The warmth of the banked fires came up at them at once. She made a small movement of her shoulders, no more than a single drawing-in of the warm air, and put it down. He saw it. He said nothing. They went down the kitchen passage, past the still quiet kitchen, past the still room shut up, past the small servants' hall. At the foot of the back stair, the pantry door stood half open, and he saw, through it, the small servants' chamber off the pantry. The narrow iron cot under the low window, the thin grey blanket folded plain upon it, the wooden stool, the small deal box for what few possessions she owned, the chamber she had slept in 3½ years. He did not turn his head. He did not speak. He marked it, and they went on. At the foot of the principal back stair he paused, and turned to her, and said in the same deep, clear, quiet baritone, "I shall ask you to go up to the south wing blue chamber. Patty Goodwin shall come up to you within the 1/4 hour with hot water and a clean morning gown. You shall not, from this hour, kneel upon the back court of this house. Will you do me that small kindness, Lady Hermione, and go up?" She inclined her head once. She said, "My lord," and went up the back stair to the south wing blue chamber, in a quietness which had so much practice in it that it could not have been mistaken for any want of feeling, only for a long use of holding feeling very still. He stood a moment at the foot of the stair, listening to her tread fade upon the upper landing. Then he turned and walked back down the kitchen passage and rang the small brass bell at the housekeeper's door, which was the bell that called the butler. At 6:15 precisely, Mr. Goodwin came down the back stair, fully dressed. He was 64, of thinning silver-grey hair brushed back, pale blue eyes finely lined with quiet grief, fair pale indoor skin, a long kind clean-shaven face, 6 feet upright, thin upright in his plain black butler's tailcoat, white cravat properly tied, black silk waistcoat with small gilt buttons, charcoal pantaloons, polished black shoes, the small black silk mourning band on his left arm. He inclined deeply. "My lord, Mr. Goodwin, come into the small parlour with me, if you will." They went into the small ground-floor parlour beside the hall, where a fire had been laid the night before, and was now newly woken. Cassandra did not sit. He set the brush which he yet held upon the small mahogany side-table beside the door, and looked at it, and looked at his butler, and waited. Mr. Goodwin understood the silence at once. He drew breath. He spoke in steady, quiet gravity, the small, finely lined, pale blue eyes very level on his master's. "My lord, I beg your lordship's pardon for the silence I had kept until your lordship was here. I had not been able to write it. Your lordship's cousin, Lady Hermione Marchmont, was brought to this house in the May of 1813 by your lordship's late uncle, the 7th Earl, of whom I was a butler 31 years, and was, upon her arrival, set by the late Earl, upon the housekeeper's settled view, to such common household work as had been set her since, the back court, the laundry, the still room, the kitchen. Mrs. Pusey has held since the lady's arrival that genteel kinship without portion is best occupied in such a manner. The late Earl assented. He was not a man who much disturbed his housekeeper's settled views. Mrs. Trent, the cook, and I have, between us, sent up small additional meals to Lady Hermione's room when we could. We have lit a small fire in her chamber on the coldest nights when we could. We have spoken to Lady Hermione always with the address of her rank, when we have spoken to her at all, which has not been often, the housekeeper being of another mind. I have not, until this hour, spoken to the late Earl upon the matter, nor, since the late Earl's death in October, written to your lordship of it. I had feared the late Earl's anger would fall upon Lady Hermione rather than upon me, and the heavier for my speaking, and I had feared, since October, that any letter sent to a new master, not yet arrived, might be the worse for the lady, if Mrs. Pusey came to read of it before your lordship. It was not well done of me, my lord. I beg your lordship's pardon." He stopped. Cassandra stood a long moment before the fire. His clear, cool, storm-grey eyes did not lift from the flame. When at last he spoke, his voice was quieter still, and held no anger toward the man before him. The anger was elsewhere. "Mr. Goodwin, you shall not be put out of your place by this. You shall remain butler at Stannersley while you live and choose. We shall speak again at 7. Be so kind as to send Mrs. Pusey to me here at 6:30 precisely. You shall remain by the door." "My lord." Mr. Goodwin inclined deeply, and went out, and the door closed behind him very gently. At 6:30 precisely Mrs. Pusey came in. She was 56, of iron-grey hair pinned tight beneath a small white linen housekeeper's cap, sharp, pale grey eyes set close, fair, pale, slightly sallow indoor skin, narrow lips habitually pressed thin, medium 5 feet and 5 inches thin, upright, in a plain, dark bombazine housekeeper's gown with long sleeves and high round neck, a white linen apron, a chatelaine of household keys at her waist, chiming faintly as she entered, plain black leather shoes, a small black silk mourning band on her left arm. She made him a housekeeper's bow, civil and pressed-lipped, and waited with the small, still air of a woman who had governed this house 10 years. Cassandra did not invite her to sit. He stood at the fire, his right hand resting upon the marble of the chimney-piece beside the brush which he had set there, and he said only, "Mrs. Pusey, will you be so good as to set out, very briefly, the household's view of Lady Hermione Marchmont's position in this house since May of 1813. Her narrow lips pressed the thinner. She drew breath. She gave him, as she had given the late Earl, 3 sentences, settled and unhurried. Lady Hermione had taken her station of her own accord, my lord, in conformity with the late Earl's own direction. The household had benefited by her industry without the attendant cost. She was, by her own choosing, content where she was. She closed her mouth. Cassandra did not raise his voice. He did not look at her. He looked at the brush upon the chimney-piece, and he spoke to it as though the brush had asked, "Mrs. Pusey, you shall leave this house by 10 o'clock this morning. You shall be paid a quarter's wages from the steward's office before you go. Mr. Goodwin shall write you, at my dictation and over my signature, a 1-line character which shall state that you served as housekeeper at Stannersley Hall from 1806 to the 14th of December, 1816. There shall be nothing further written of you. You may apply to the steward at 7:30 for your wages. You may not speak to any servant of this house, nor to Lady Hermione. Mr. Goodwin shall remain by the door of any room you enter. Good morning to you." He rang the small brass bell at the chimney-piece for Mr. Goodwin. He did not look at her again. The chatelaine of keys gave one small, brittle chime as she turned upon her heel. The door behind her closed. Mr. Goodwin came in. "Mr. Goodwin, Mrs. Pusey is dismissed. She is to be from the house by 10. Be so good as to remain by her, as she goes, until the door is closed upon her at the lodge. The keys are to be in your hand by the 9:30, my lord." "And, Mr. Goodwin," said Cassandra as the butler turned, "I should be grateful if you would have a fire lit in the south wing blue chamber and a tray sent up. Have your niece Patty take it, if Patty is willing. A pot of strong tea, a little hot bread and butter, what can be had at this hour? Lady Hermione shall not, this morning, breakfast in any servant's place." "My lord, Patty is by the back stair. She shall be glad." At 7, Cassandra sat at the small writing desk in his late uncle's small library and wrote a brief letter to Mr. Greasley of York, the family solicitor at his chambers in Stonegate. The letter was short. It begged Mr. Greasley's attendance at Stannersley by the next post-chaise upon a matter touching the late Earl's niece, Lady Hermione Marchmont. It requested Mr. Greasley to bring with him such forms of settlement and of quarterly allowance as he should think proper to a quarterly sum of 300 guineas charged upon the estate. It was signed, Stannersley, in the close-pressed, firm hand of a man who had drafted muster rolls 8 years in Madras. It was sealed with the heavy silver signet in red wax. Mr. Goodwin saw it down to the village upon the 8 o'clock post. At noon, precisely Patty Goodwin, 8 and 18, of soft, mid-brown hair and clear hazel eyes, in her plain dark grey print cotton housemaid's gown and white linen apron, came down to the small ground-floor morning-room and announced, with a small, quick courtesy, that Lady Hermione Marchmont waited upon his lordship. Cassandra rose at once and stood at the hearth. She came in. She had been bathed. She had been given a clean, plain morning gown of his late aunt's that had lain folded these 8 years in a press in the south wing, a high-waisted, soft, pale blue wool morning gown with long sleeves and a white lawn fichu at the throat. Her dark, honey-blonde, wavy hair had been properly dressed in the low chignon at the nape. Her late mother's small pearl drop earrings hung at her ears. Her father's small mourning ring of plain gold with a single jetstone sat upon the smallest finger of her right hand. Plain ivory silk slippers shod her feet. Her ivory fair skin no longer showed reddened at the knuckles. Her clear, cool sea-green eyes were very steady. She made him a slow, proper curtsy, and rose. He inclined deeply in his turn. He did not speak at once. When he spoke, the deep, clear, quiet baritone came as it had come at the back-court arch, no more than the room between them needed. "Lady Hermione, I shall, if you will permit, set out very plainly the position from this hour. You are the only niece of the late 7th Earl of Stannersley in this house, and you are, from this hour, the Lady of Stannersley in your uncle's place. You shall keep no further servant office in this house. You shall have your own apartments in the south wing. Mr. Goodwin shall set them out for your acceptance this afternoon, and you shall alter or refuse them as you shall choose. Your quarter's allowance from the estate shall be set, from this 14th of December, 1816, at 300 guineas per quarter, payable at Lady Day, Midsummer, Michaelmas, and Christmas. Mr. Greasley shall come up from York within the week to draw the deeds. The deeds shall be brought to you for your signature, and you shall sign or not sign as you shall think fit." He paused. "Have you, Lady Hermione, any other request you should wish to make of me at this hour?" She stood very still. The clear, cool, sea-green eyes held his a long moment without falling, and the soft, well-shaped mouth was composed, and at last she spoke in her soft, warm, low alto, quietly, as one who had thought of one small thing only and would ask no other. "My lord, I should be grateful, if it would be permitted, to write a letter today to Mr. Goodwin's niece, Patty's mother in the village, to thank her for the long kindness which had brought Patty to me." He inclined. "It shall be done before the dinner bell, Lady Hermione." She inclined her head once. She did not weep. She thanked him in the same soft, warm, low alto, "I thank your lordship." And she allowed Patty Goodwin to take her up to the south wing apartments, and the door of the small morning room closed behind her, and Cassander stood a long moment yet at the hearth, his hand upon the marble, and looked into the fire. That evening, in proper grace of her first day of restoration, Cassander did not press her into the great dining room. He had her dinner sent up at 7:30 to the small sitting room of the south wing apartments, where a fire had been newly laid and was burning bright, and where the long, soft, pale blue silk curtains had been drawn against the cold. Mrs. Trent the cook, 52, of soft grey-brown hair pinned beneath her large white linen cap, warm pale blue eyes, fair pink-cheeked round face, and kindly mouth, medium 5 feet and 5 inches plump, in her plain dark blue print cotton cook's gown, beneath her large white linen apron and white kerchief at the throat, brought up the tray with her own hands. She set it down upon the small round table by the fire, with quiet feeling, and she said only, "It is a great deal to me, my lady, to set this down for you." And she went out and closed the door softly. Hermione, alone after she was gone, sat to the small dinner. She ate a little. She drew the soft, pale blue silk shawl about her shoulders. Then she rose, and crossed to the small writing desk by the south window, and lit the candle, and took up the pen, and wrote the promised letter to Mrs. Goodwin in the village, in her steady, clear hand, before the dinner bell of the great dining room had rung below. The cold, black December night lay quiet over the Yorkshire moors. The first day of her new life was at its close. The Sunday morning of the 15th of December broke pale and cold over the home park of Stannersley, with a hard frost laid silver on the grass. Cassander Edmund Halford, 8th Earl of Stannersley, 33, tall at 6'2", and lean and broad-shouldered, with the thick, deep black wavy hair cut close at the nape, and the one premature streak of pure silver above the right temple, the clear, cool, storm-grey eyes considering and steady, the small, thin, pale scar across the right eyebrow from a fall down a teak stare at Madras in 1812, the firm, grave mouth and the small, dark mole at the right corner of the lower lip drew the household into its new shape before the church bells rang. He stood by the long mahogany table in the morning room at 7:20, in dark charcoal superfine and buff waistcoat with small silver buttons, the heavy silver Stannersley's signet of a stag's head over a stone bridge upon his right hand, and rang for the butler. Mr. Goodwin came to him at once. 64, the thinning silver-grey hair brushed back from a long, kind, clean-shaven face, pale blue eyes finely lined with quiet grief, tall at 6 foot, thin and upright in plain black butler's tailcoat with white cravat and black silk waistcoat, charcoal pantaloons and polished black shoes, and bowed with the soft tread of 40 years' service. "My lord, be so good as to bring up Mrs. Trent and Patty Goodwin to the morning room at 8. The clock struck 8. Mrs. Trent came in first, 52, soft grey-brown hair beneath a large white linen cap, warm pale blue eyes set in a fair, pink-cheeked round face, medium at 5'5", plump in a dark blue print cotton cook's gown beneath a large white linen apron, and dropped a small, careful country curtsy. Behind her stood Patty Goodwin, 18, mid-brown hair beneath a small white lace cap, clear hazel eyes, oval face, slender at 5'2", upright in plain dark grey print cotton housemaid's gown. Mr. Goodwin came in last and stood at his sideboard. "Mrs. Trent?" Cassandra said. "Mrs. Pusey is gone. The keys lie upon the desk in the small office. I shall not look out a new housekeeper this side of Lady Day. The house has gone 3.5 years upon the kindness of 3 of you, and I shall not unsettle that work in haste. Will you take, for the present, the keeping of the house at £30 the year above your cook's wage?" Mrs. Trent's pink-cheeked, round face flushed quite pink. The warm, pale blue eyes blinked once. She dropped a second curtsy. "I should be very glad, my lord. I shall do my best. Patty Goodwin, you shall remain housemaid upon your present wage, with a small further sum added at Lady Day. I require, further, that Lady Hermione shall not be left alone with any tradesman or visitor at the house. You will sit in attendance upon her in any room she should receive callers, with your sewing." The clear hazel eyes lifted under the lace cap. "Yes, my lord." "Mr. Goodwin, you shall continue in your office. Lady Hermione's establishment in the south wing shall be conducted by yourself and Mrs. Trent in concert. Mr. Greasley comes from York tomorrow, and the deeds shall be drawn upon her allowance. Until they are signed, any want of hers shall be charged to me upon my private account." "My lord." The cook curtsied. The housemaid curtsied. They went out together. Mr. Goodwin closed the door, paused, and breathed in once slow and out again slow, and went to make up the morning's letters. The bell of St. Oswald's rang the 10:30 through the iron December air, when Cassandra walked down to morning service. Lady Hermione kept her bed. He had asked her at breakfast whether she should prefer to keep her room one further day or come down, and she had answered that she should be glad to keep her room, and he had inclined the dark head and said no more. The Reverend Hawthorne called at Stannersley that Sunday afternoon at 4:58, sandy grey hair finely thinning at the crown, clear honest hazel eyes behind small gold-rimmed spectacles, fair gently weathered skin, long kind clean-shaven face, medium at 5'10", thin and with a slight stoop, in black cassock with white linen surplice, carried over the arm and white collar band at the throat, and the small silver crucifix on the black silk cord upon his breast, and sat down in the small library with his teacup, looking gravely across the mahogany tea-table. "My lord," he said in his quiet country voice, "I had Mr. Goodwin's word, this morning after the service, of yesterday's events. I shall say only this. I had wondered, my lord, why I had not seen Lady Hermione at the parish service these 3 years past. I am very glad to learn the cause shall be remedied. Cassander set down his teacup. I am very glad, sir, that you wondered. I should have wished it to have been wondered at. The vicar did not answer. He drank his tea. He stood and gave his hand, which Cassander took, and they walked out together to the front steps in the long blue cold dusk. Mr. Greasley came up by post-chaise from York the following morning, the Monday the 16th, and stepped down at Stannersley at 10 o'clock, 49, thinning silver-grey hair carefully combed back from a long, narrow scholar's clean-shaven face, steady grey eyes behind small gold-rimmed spectacles, fair indoor pallor, tall at 6 foot, thin and with a slight stoop, in plain black superfine and white cravat, and black silk waistcoat and charcoal pantaloons and polished black shoes, the heavy leather-bound client's ledger under the long left arm. He shook hands with his new principal in the small library at 25 past, and unfastened the brass clasp upon the writing table. My lord, upon the matter of the late 7th Earl's will and the entail. Pray go on. The entail covers the title, the hall, the home park, the home farm, the 4 tenanted farms, the fishings, and the advowson. The personalty was in the late Earl's free disposal. The will, dated the 3rd of June, 1814, bequeaths the entire personalty, plate, library, paintings other than those in entail, riding horses, and the consols at £35,000 of the 3 per cents to the title. That is to say, my lord, to your present self. It makes one further bequest, to Lady Frances Worsley, the late Earl's only surviving daughter, the sum of £3,000 in consols, free of duty. There is no further bequest. There is no mention of the late Captain Marchmont's daughter. None? None, my lord. I pressed the late Earl, in May of 14, the question of his niece. He answered that she was provided for under his roof, and that the matter was the housekeeper's. Greasley turned a page. The Worsley estate has been in arrears these 4 years past. Sir Edmund's account at his own York Council was unpaid at the November term by some 60 guineas. Lady Frances had reasonable expectation of better. She has not had it. The £3,000 is the figure she had set herself to expect, and nothing in the will or entail bars the Earl from drawing an allowance to Lady Hermione from the estate. Nothing whatever, my lord. The personalty is in your free disposal. You may settle £300 the quarter upon Lady Hermione for her natural life by deed under your hand and seal, and I shall draw the deed this afternoon. Draw it. The deeds were drawn that afternoon between 3 and 5:30, the pen scratching steady upon foolscap. They were signed at 6. Cassander signed first, the heavy silver signet pressed warm into red wax. Lady Hermione signed second, in her plain composed schoolroom hand. Mr. Goodwin and Mr. Greasley witnessed. She laid down the pen, inclined her head once, and said, in the soft, warm, low alto, "I thank you, my lord," and went up to her south wing apartments with the small mourning ring catching the candlelight at the turn of the great stair. It was on the Tuesday morning at 11 that he passed the door of the south library and heard her voice. The door stood not quite shut. Through the thin bar of the open, the soft, warm, low alto of his cousin Hermione came clear and unhurried, reading aloud upon the empty room. He stopped in the doorway and stood quite still, the storm-grey eyes upon the bar of the open. She was reading Cowper's Task. The wing-chair beside the fire was turned 3/4 toward the long sash window. He could see the long, rich, dark honey-blonde, wavy hair, pinned smooth in the low chignon at the nape, the clear, cool, sea-green eyes downturned upon the open octavo, the ivory-fair English skin, with the faint, pale freckles across the bridge of the nose, the small, natural beauty mark just below the left corner of the lower lip, the oval, composed face. She sat slender and upright at 5'5", in the plain, high-waisted, soft, pale blue wool morning gown with white lawn fichu, small pearl-drop earrings, her father's small mourning ring of plain gold, and jet upon the smallest finger of her right hand. The small, steady alto carried Cowper's blank verse with the fine, instinctive cadence of a young woman who had learned her cadence aloud from her dying mother. He listened 2 minutes by the passage clock. He did not interrupt. He withdrew before the carpet should give him under the heel. He spoke of it at breakfast on the Wednesday. The long mahogany table had Cassandra at one end and Hermione at the other. Mr. Goodwin stood at the sideboard with the silver coffee pot. Cassandra set down his cup. "Cousin." "My lord." "I passed the South Library at 11 yesterday. You were reading Cowper aloud." "To no one. I had not, until that hour, heard your voice in this house." Hermione's small hands rested still upon either side of her plate. The cool, sea-green eyes did not waver. "I have read aloud to myself, my lord, since my mother died. It is a small habit. It steadies the mind. It does the room a kindness also." He inclined the dark head. "It is a kindness I should be very glad to have done me, for the year of my settling into Stannersley. Will you read to me each morning at 11 in the South Library? I had not known how poorly I should miss the having of a woman's voice read to me until I heard yours." The cool sea-green eyes held his a long, quiet moment across the table. She folded her hands in her lap beneath the table and answered, in her composed, soft, warm, low alto, "I should be glad, my lord. Patty Goodwin shall attend. Patty Goodwin shall attend." He inclined the dark head. "We begin this morning at 11. They began that morning at 11. He sat in the deep wing chair upon the further side of the South Library hearth, with one leg crossed long over the other. She sat opposite with the open octavo of Cowper in her lap, and the small pearl-drop earrings catching once the firelight, and read the half-hour of the Winter Walk at noon. Patty Goodwin sat by the door upon a small rush-bottom chair, with her work-basket in her lap. They read Cowper through across the Thursday, the Friday, and into the Saturday. They began Tacitus's Agricola on the Monday. Patty Goodwin sat by the door with her sewing each morning, the clear hazel eyes raised once upon the slender figure of her young mistress at the wing-chair, and lowered each time again. Sunday, the 22nd of December. The first Sunday of Lady Hermione at the parish service in the family pew, for the first time in 3.5 years. The pew door creaked once when Cassandra opened it for her. The village congregation looked up, and looked away, and looked back. The pews filled beyond their ordinary measure, for the village had heard that Lady Hermione had been brought down from the back court by the new Earl. Hermione sat upright, in her plain pale blue wool, with a small black silk shawl across the slender shoulders, made the steady responses in the soft, warm, low alto, and lifted the cool, sea-green eyes once when the Reverend Hawthorne came up the chancel steps. The Reverend Hawthorne saw her. The long, thin hand upon the parish prayer book steadied a quiet, visible moment. He rested the hazel eyes behind the small gold rims upon her, a half-second longer than the order required, inclined the sandy grey head, turned the page, and preached a brief, plain country sermon upon the parable of the lost being found. He spoke for 14 minutes. Very quiet. The parish was quiet through them, and the hard frost on the south transept lancet thawed in long, slow drops down the leaded panes. The household walked back together up the gravel sweep in the iron, clear, noonday cold. Cassandra, at the foot of the sweep, paused, turned, and offered Hermione his arm. She set her ivory-gloved hand upon the dark charcoal sleeve and walked the rest of the way at her cousin's side, with Mr. Goodwin and Mrs. Trent and Patty Goodwin behind them in their Sunday best. Christmas Day fell upon the Wednesday. The household took morning service at St. Oswald's at the 10:30, and Mrs. Trent set out the cold collation at 1. At 3, the household was called to the small library and given its Christmas wages and a small present each. For Mrs. Trent, a length of warm, dark green wool. For Mr. Goodwin, a length of slate grey wool. For Patty Goodwin, a fresh white linen apron and a plain steel knife in a small leather sheath, out of the new Earl's hand. Hermione stood at his right shoulder in her pale blue wool, with the white lawn fichu and small pearl drop earrings, the mourning ring upon her right hand. When her cousin had given them, Hermione stepped one quiet pace forward upon the small Turkey rug before the fire. The cool sea-green eyes rested upon Mrs. Trent first. "Mrs. Trent," she said, in the soft, warm, low alto, very quiet, "I have not, in 3.5 years, had any name in this house by which I might thank you in my own. You have brought me up hot water at 6 of a winter morning when I had not asked it. You have set a fresh egg upon my supper tray when I had not asked it. You have looked the other way when the bread and butter was cut a little thicker than the housekeeper's account allowed. I shall not forget. I thank you." Mrs. Trent's plump, pink-cheeked round face went very pink. The corner of the large white linen apron came up to the warm, pale blue eye and stayed there a long, quiet moment. She dropped a deep, slow country curtsy, lower than she had given the new Earl on the Saturday morning, and could not quite speak, and only inclined the large white linen-capped head twice. "Mr. Goodwin." The cool sea-green eyes moved. "You have left a candle in my passage on every dark winter morning these 3 years past. You have not, in 3 years, asked me a question to which I could not answer. You have known what I have not been able to say. I thank you, Mr. Goodwin, for the kindness of your knowing." Mr. Goodwin's pale blue eyes were very steady. He inclined the long, kind, clean-shaven face and answered, "It has been an honour, my lady." "Patty Goodwin." The clear hazel eyes lifted under the small white lace cap and were wet. "You have brought up my supper tray on every evening of the last 6 months. You have set out the soft white bread upon the plate beside the bowl. You have not once looked at me with any unkindness or any pity. I thank you, Patty, for the great kindness of looking at me only as your friend." Patty Goodwin's clear hazel eyes spilled once, small and quiet, beneath the small white lace cap. She caught the spill with the corner of her white linen apron and curtsied deep and gave a small quick smile beneath the wet lashes that was the smile of a young woman who had been waiting 3.5 years to be given leave to smile at her young mistress in her own person. Cassandra stood with his back to the small library fire and watched. The clear, cool, storm-grey eyes did not move from Hermione's slender, 5'5" figure at the small Turkey rug for the whole of those 3 small, quiet sentences. He did not speak when she had done. He inclined the dark head once, turned, and rang for tea. The first letter from Lady Frances Worsley came up by the post on the Friday the 27th, dated London, December the 27th, 1816. The hand was a careful conventional lady's hand. It conveyed her compliments, her felicitations upon his accession, her astonishment to have learned, by a letter of her late father's housekeeper, Mrs. Pusey, lately come up to her in town, that Lady Hermione Marchmont had been received at Stannersley in something of a new degree, and signified her intention of calling, with Sir Edmund, in the 3rd week of January, to learn for herself how matters at the Hall had been disposed. Cassandra read it once, set it down, and answered in 3 plain lines. He should be at home to Lady Frances and Sir Edmund at noon upon any day they should appoint. New Year's Eve fell on the Tuesday the 31st. Cassandra and Hermione dined at 5 with Mr. Goodwin at the sideboard, and afterward, at the 6:30 in the long blue dusk, walked once up and down the long upper gallery by the light of the 6 small wall sconces. He showed her the 7th Earl in the great 1814 mezzotint at the gallery's upper end, and the 6th Earl in the long Reynolds beside it, and stopped, 2/3 of the way down, at the small, narrow oval canvas of the late 7th Earl in his youth, at 28, painted in 1801 at the time of his marriage, and beside him in the same canvas, the long-faced young naval lieutenant of 23 in the King's Blue. His younger brother, that was Hermione's father at 20. She stood a long minute at the small, narrow oval. She did not put up her gloved hand to it. She did not weep. The cool, sea-green eyes rested upon the long, thin, clean-shaven young face of the lieutenant in the King's Blue, and held him the long minute, and then inclined the honey-blonde head once, small, quiet, in greeting, and in farewell at the year's close, and turned, and walked on at her cousin's side toward the gallery's lower door. The 3rd of January, the Friday, was a long, quiet morning's reading. But this morning, Cassander himself read aloud, in turn, in the deep, clear, quiet baritone from the new octavo of Persuasion, lately come up from town. Hermione sat in the wing chair opposite him, with her small embroidery in her lap, and her cool sea-green eyes upon the small fire, and gave Anne Elliot her quiet attention. Patty Goodwin sat by the door with her sewing. The 5th of January, the second Sunday of Lady Hermione at St. Oswald's, the village pews were full again, but quieter now, and the small lifting of small village heads as the family pew filled was no longer the lifting of curiosity, but the small content lifting of a parish that had taken its young lady back into its keeping and meant not to lose her again. The Reverend Hawthorne preached upon the gospel of the Epiphany, upon the 3 travellers come a long way through the cold to find the small light. He looked once over the small gold rims at Hermione in the family pew, inclined his sandy grey head gravely, and went on. It was on the Saturday night, the 11th of January, at the 11:30, that Cassander sat alone in the South Library, with the fire low and 2 candles burning steady upon the writing-table. The brandy glass at his elbow was untouched. The leather-bound estate ledger was open beneath his right hand. The small octavo of Cowper that Hermione had been reading from for the first 10 days of their reading lay closed upon the small table at his elbow, with her plain mother-of-pearl marker between 2 pages near the end of the winter walk. He had been 6 weeks the 8th Earl of Stannersley. 6 weeks this Saturday night. He had been 4 weeks in the small composed quiet of an arrangement his late uncle had not, in the just measure of any reasonable man, deserved to be permitted, and his cousin Hermione had, without thinking, given him. He did not yet know what he was becoming. He knew only that he had been 6 weeks in this house, and had lived 4 of them at the soft, warm, low alto of a young woman reading aloud in the South Library at 11 of a winter morning, and that the Saturday morning he had come in by the back-court arch was the last morning of his life, upon which he had been a man entire to himself. He blew out the candles one after the other, with a small, steady breath. He laid the leather-bound ledger to. He took up his bedroom candle from the small side table and lit it from the dying fire. He went up the great stair to bed. Tuesday the 14th of January in the year of our Lord, 1817 came in over the moor with a hard pale blue noon sky, and at 12 o'clock the wheels of a hired post-chaise from York struck the gravel of the great sweep of Stannersley Hall and drew up at the great door. The 2 grey post horses stood blowing white plumes into the cold. The postilion swung down to lower the carriage step, and from within the dim leather-smelling interior, the first of the 2 visitors descended with the small, careful manner of a woman who had calculated the angle of her descent in a long looking-glass before she set out. She lifted her chin to the carved stone pediment as one who took quiet possession of an inheritance she had not been told had been given to another. This was Lady Frances Worsley née Holford, 31 years of age, the late 7th Earl of Stannersley's only surviving daughter. Married these 8 years past to Sir Edmund Worsley of Worsley Park in the East Riding. Her glossy chestnut-brown hair had been dressed under a fashionable lace cap. Her large, pale grey eyes were settled long since in their snobberies. Her alabaster fair skin was lightly powdered. She had been conventionally handsome at 25 in the London seasons of 11 and 12. She was now slightly hardened. She was medium of height, 5'7", slim, upright. She wore, at noon in a Yorkshire January, a high-waisted, deep-rose silk evening gown with short puff sleeves, a parure of small pearls and diamonds, long white kid gloves to above the elbow, and in her gloved right hand a small spangled gauze fan. The fan was carried with the small deliberate intention of being carried. Sir Edmund Worsley descended after her with a heavier tread. He was 35 and looked 8 or 9 years older than that. His sandy grey hair had been carefully oiled forward. His small, shallow, watery, pale blue eyes were set rather close. His sallow skin was faintly broken in fine red veins at the cheekbone. His height was a medium 5'9", and he carried before him, beneath the dark brown wool tailcoat with its slightly worn gilt buttons, a soft paunch that pressed against the primrose yellow silk waistcoat. His pantaloons were buff. His top boots were tasselled with small, worn brass tassels. A quizzing glass on a black silk ribbon hung over the waistcoat. Mr. Goodwin, the butler, 64, his thinning silver-grey hair brushed back, his pale blue eyes finely lined with quiet grief, tall 6-foot upright in plain black butler's tailcoat with white cravat and black silk waistcoat, and the small black silk mourning band on the left arm. Mr. Goodwin had stood at the door these 10 minutes past. He came down the 2 stone steps without hurry. He inclined his head. "Lady Frances, Sir Edmund. His lordship is in the morning room." He turned and led them indoors. The morning room lay to the south of the front hall. Its walls hung with pale duck-egg silk damask aged into a soft, ghostly green. 2 wing chairs in faded, straw-coloured silk damask were drawn to either side of the chimney-piece, a small marquetry tea-table between. A small bright fire burned. The clock on the mantel stood at 4½ minutes past noon. Cassander Edmund Halford, 8th Earl of Stannersley, 33, stood at the chimney-piece. His thick, deep black, wavy hair, with the single premature streak of pure silver above the right temple and the one habitual lock fallen across the brow, had been brushed that morning. His clear, cool, storm-grey eyes, the colour of a winter Yorkshire moor under cloud, rested steadily upon the door. The small, thin, pale scar lay quiet across the right eyebrow. The small dark mole sat at the right corner of his lower lip. He stood tall, 6'2", lean and broad-shouldered, in plain dark charcoal superfine morning coat, buff waistcoat, buff breeches, brown-topped boots, and a white cravat properly tied. The heavy silver Stannersley signet sat upon his right hand, set upon the marble of the chimney-piece, still. In the right-hand wing-chair sat Lady Hermione Marchmont, 23, the late 7th Earl's only niece in the house. Her long, rich, dark, honey-blonde, wavy hair, with its ash-gold lights, was pinned smooth in the low chignon at the nape, with a small wisp escaped at the right temple. Her clear, cool, sea-green eyes rested at quiet composure upon the open page of a slim duodecimo cowper laid upon her lap. Her ivory fair skin showed the faint scattering of pale freckles across the bridge of the nose and the small natural beauty mark just below the left corner of the lower lip. She wore a plain, high-waisted, soft, pale blue wool morning gown with a white lawn fichu at the throat. At her throat, on a thin black silk ribbon, lay the small silver locket which Cassander had set into her hand on the 5th of January. In her ears, the small pearl drop earrings of her late mother. Upon the smallest finger of her right hand, the small mourning ring of plain gold with its single jet stone. She did not rise as the door opened. Mr. Goodwin announced the visitors in his level voice. "Lady Frances Worsley, Sir Edmund Worsley." He stepped back. He did not retire from the room. Frances came in upon her overbright, fashionable manner. She crossed to the chimney-piece in 3 small rose-silk steps, lifted her gloved hand, and let her cousin take it. The spangled fan tilted forward, she said with the small, calculated brightness of the London drawing-rooms, "My dear cousin Cassandra, we are come at last." Her eyes had not yet rested upon the wing-chair. "Lady Frances," said Cassandra, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone. "Sir Edmund, pray be seated. Cousin Hermione, I think you have not yet had the pleasure." The pale grey eyes moved then. They moved to the wing-chair. They settled upon the pale blue wool gown, upon the white lawn fichu, upon the small silver locket, upon the thin black ribbon at the throat, upon the small pearl drop earrings, upon the open volume of Cowper. The painted lower lip pressed once forward. The spangled fan came up. "Cousin Cassandra," she said, in the small sharp opening line she had rehearsed in the post-chaise, "we had heard the most extraordinary thing of the household. We trust the rumour does not quite bear up. The Marchmont girl, my poor cousin, at the piano in the morning-room." The room held one full breath of silence. Cassandra did not stir at the chimney-piece. He looked once at Hermione, and the look was small and quiet and unworried. Hermione laid the volume of Cowper softly closed upon the small marquetry tea-table at her right hand. She did not rise. She did not lift her chin. She lifted only her clear, cool, sea-green eyes from the volume to Lady Frances's face, and she said, in the steady, soft, warm, low alto, "Lady Frances, the rumour bears up. I am not at the piano because I do not play. I read." The fan in the gloved right hand stilled. Frances had not been answered in that fashion in any drawing-room since her marriage. She had been answered in flutters and flushes. She had not been answered in the steady quiet of a young woman seated with a closed Cowper laid aside upon a marquetry tea-table. She pressed forward. "And the back court, cousin Hermione. We had heard there was some confusion. Surely the rumour does not extend so far as to—" "I had scrubbed the flagstones of the back court," said Hermione in the same steady, soft, warm, low alto, "for 3.5 years, Lady Frances, from late September of 2013 until the morning of December the 14th past. The rumour, in that particular, is exactly correct." Frances drew breath. "And the kitchen passage, they tell us in York." I had carried the coal scuttle along the kitchen passage 4 times each morning, at 5:30 in the winter. I had blacked the kitchen range and set the laundry copper upon the boil before the household rose. I had slept in the small chamber off the pantry, upon a low truckle bed pushed beneath the cold meat shelf. The late 7th Earl, my uncle, had set me there in the autumn of 13 by the housekeeper's settled view that genteel kinship without portion was best occupied. The present Earl, my cousin, found me in the back court on the morning of December the 14th, took the brush from my hand and the bucket from my knee, and has set me here. Frances opened her painted mouth and shut it. "And the apron, cousin Hermione," she said in a smaller voice, "the soiled apron. The soiled apron also bears up, Lady Frances. I had laundered it Saturday evenings with the household linen. As to the rest, I could not in conscience say more about my late uncle than Lady Frances might already know herself." The clock on the mantel ticked once. The fan in the gloved right hand sank a little to the deep rose silk. Frances had no answer to it. She had come into the morning-room with 3 further small, sharp lines pinned within her pearl bandeau, and she found that she could not, in the steady, quiet, sea-green eyes of the young woman in the wing-chair, lift any of them. Sir Edmund cleared his throat. His watery eyes moved from his wife to Cassandra, to the wing-chair and back. He muttered, "Counsel in York, irregular treatment in Chancery." Cassandra straightened from the chimney-piece. The single lock of black hair fell again across the brow. The storm-grey eyes rested upon the watery pale blue ones, and then upon the deep rose silk. He spoke in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, 3 sentences, no more, no fewer. Lady Frances, Sir Edmund, Lady Hermione Marchmont is the late 7th Earl's only niece in the house. She is by my hand, and by Mr. Greasley's deed, the Lady of Stannersley in my uncle's place. She shall continue to be so treated for so long as she chooses to remain at Stannersley, and I shall be obliged to anyone who treats her as such in my hearing or out of it. He waited a small breath. I bid you good afternoon. Frances rose. The deep rose silk made a small whisper. Sir Edmund came up with a small grunt, the quizzing glass tapping once against the small worn gilt buttons of the brown coat. Mr. Goodwin opened the door and inclined. At 3 of the clock, the post-chaise wheels struck the gravel of the great sweep again and turned out beneath the gatehouse arch. Within the dim, leather-smelling interior, Sir Edmund took out his quizzing glass and dropped it, and took it up again, and muttered once more of York Council, of irregular treatment, of the family, of Chancery, of £2,000 at the least. Beside him, in the deep rose silk, his wife pressed her painted lower lip, and pressed it again, and was, for the 7 cold miles between Stannersley and the York Post Road, entirely silent. That evening at 8:30, the long gallery of Stannersley Hall lay quiet beneath its high coffered ceiling, and the 7th Earl and the 6th Earl and the long thin Tudor knight who had begun the line looked down from the dark walls upon their kinsman in dark charcoal superfine and upon the young woman at his elbow in the plain pale blue wool. The fire in the great chimney-piece at the gallery's eastern end had burned low, and the small red glow of it laid one long, soft, red-gold band along the rich, dark honey blonde of the low chignon at the nape. They walked the gallery's length with the small, quiet step that had become, in the past month, their custom after dinner. Cassandra looked along the length of the gallery and said, very quietly, in the deep, clear, quiet baritone, Lady Hermione, did the cousin's visit wound you? She did not stop walking. The small wisp at the right temple stirred. The small silver locket lay still upon the thin black ribbon at her throat. She answered him, in the steady, soft, warm, low alto, without bitterness. I have been spoken to a good deal worse, my lord, by people who had less right. He inclined his head once. He did not press her. They walked another half the length of the gallery, and at the small painted miniature of the Tudor knight's wife in pearl-stitched satin he stopped. He said, in the same low gravity, Then I shall press them no further on your account, beyond ensuring they have no further right of any kind. She inclined. They walked on. Tuesday, the 21st of January, came in colder still, and the second post from London was set upon the silver tray in the front hall at 11:03. Cassandra took the letters into the South Library. There were 4. The first was a bill from his London hatter, the second, a brief steady note from his mother at the Greenbourne Dower House, the third a printed circular from the Madras Subscription Library, the fourth was a folded note sealed in pale yellow wax, dispatched from a solicitor's office in Lendal in the city of York 3 days before. It was franked in a thin, scratchy clerk's hand, in the matter of his client Sir Edmund Worsley, Baronet. Cassandra broke the wax. He read the note once. He read it again. The note ran to the half of a page, and threatened, with the small phrasing of provincial chancery, to lay before the Right Honourable, the Lord Chancellor, at his Lordship's earliest convenience, the matter of certain irregular treatment of a young gentlewoman lately resident at Stannersley Hall. Cassandra laid the note flat upon the green leather of the writing-table. He laughed once, very low, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, the small, dry laugh of a man who had governed 3 districts in the Madras presidency before he was 30 and read better-drawn threats from better-drawn lawyers in a tongue not his own. He folded the note. He carried it to the front hall and gave it to Mr. Goodwin. "Lay it aside, if you will, for Mr. Greasley. He shall ride up upon the next quarter-day in any case. There is no haste." Mr. Goodwin inclined and bore the note away upon the silver tray. Wednesday, the 22nd of January, was a clear, mild day, and at 11:30, the small dog-cart of the parish came round under the gatehouse arch, and the Reverend Hawthorne climbed down with his black cassock gathered at the knee. He was 58, parish vicar of Stannersley, these 21 years past, since his preferment from the curacy at Marchmont in Norfolk. His soft, sandy grey hair was finely thinning at the crown. His clear, honest, hazel eyes behind the small, gold-rimmed spectacles were a little tired with the cold ride. His long, kind, clean-shaven face was set in a small, private resolve. He wore his black cassock with the white linen surplice pinned beneath his dark wool greatcoat, his white collar band, and the small silver crucifix on the black silk cord. He was a medium 5'10", with the slight scholar's stoop. Under his arm lay the parish register of St. Oswald's, Stannersley, in its plain calf cover, marked by a small folded ribbon of green silk. Mr. Goodwin showed him into the South Library. Cassandra rose from the writing table. Hermione, in her pale blue wool, rose from the wing chair where she had been reading. The Reverend Hawthorne inclined to them both. "My lord, your ladyship, I am come on a small matter, and yet I had thought it might serve." He laid the calf-bound register upon the small marquetry tea-table. He turned the broad pages with his careful clergyman's fingers. He found the green silk ribbon. He opened the register at the page of April 1793, and turned it about that they might read it the right way up. "You will see, my lord, that the entry is in my own hand. I had been the curate at Marchmont in Norfolk in the spring of that year, before my preferment to this living the autumn following. I had baptized her ladyship myself of a Sunday morning at the parish church there, the daughter of Captain Edmund Marchmont, R.N., and of Edith, his wife." Cassandra read the page in silence. The clear, honest, hazel eyes behind the small, gold-rimmed spectacles were very steady upon him. "It is a small thing, my lord," said the Reverend Hawthorne quietly. "But the parish register has its uses. I had baptized her ladyship myself. I shall not keep silent in this neighbourhood while any nonsense of York Council is allowed to take hold." Cassandra inclined his head in the steady warm gravity that had become, in the past month, his answer to the household's quiet acts of grace. "I am much obliged, Mr. Hawthorne." Hermione had stood at the marquetry tea-table without speaking. She laid one slender, ivory-fair hand upon the open page of the register. The small mourning ring of plain gold, with its single jetstone, upon the smallest finger of the right hand, resting just at the edge of her own name, written in the careful young hand of a curate 28 years before. She did not weep. She lifted her clear, cool, sea-green eyes to the Reverend Hawthorne. "Mr. Hawthorne, I had not known you'd been at Marchmont." "I had been, your ladyship, for the 8 years before my preferment. I had known your father a little and your mother better. Your mother taught the village children at the parsonage school of a Tuesday afternoon. She had been very good to the parish." Hermione laid her hand upon the open register one breath longer. Then she lifted it and inclined to the Reverend Hawthorne, and said only, in the steady, soft, warm, low alto, "I thank you, Mr. Hawthorne, for my mother also." The Reverend Hawthorne closed the register. He drew the green silk ribbon back into its place. He took the parish book up under his arm, inclined to them both, and went out by the South Library door with Mr. Goodwin to attend him to the dog-cart. Through the rest of January, The South Library kept its 11 o'clock hour. Each morning, at the third stroke of the long case clock, Patty Goodwin took her chair to the door with her stocking in her lap. And each morning, at 3 minutes after the hour, Cassandra came in from the writing table, and Hermione came in from her South Wing apartments with her duodecimo under her hand, and they read. They had finished Tacitus on the Friday of the first week and returned to Cowper. On the Monday following, they had set Cowper aside and taken up Persuasion again from its beginning, having read it once together in late December and finding that, in the steady, soft, warm, low alto, the second reading served them better than the first. The pale January light fell through the window, upon the green leather of the writing table, and upon the small silver locket upon the thin black ribbon at her throat. And Patty Goodwin sat very still at her stocking and did not look up. On the last day of January, which fell upon a Friday with a cold pale blue sky, Cassandra sat at the writing table in the South Library after dinner and wrote a long careful letter to his mother. Lady Olivia Halford, the Dowager Countess of Greenbourne, 60 years old, in plain black silk, full mourning these 3 years past at the Greenbourne Dower House in Northamptonshire. He wrote in his close, clear hand upon pale cream-laid paper. He wrote 4 pages without lifting the pen save to dip it, and turned the folio at the 3rd page and crossed it. He told her of the back court morning of December the 14th, and of the brush and the bucket, of the household settlement and Mrs. Pusey's quarter's wages and Mr. Greasley's deed, of the South Wing apartments and the 11 o'clock hour. He told her of the visit of Cousin Francis and Cousin Edmund, and the spangled fan, and the closed cowper upon the marquetry tea-table, of the Lendal note, and his own small, low laugh, of the Reverend Hawthorne and the parish register, and the small green silk ribbon at April 1793. And he told her, slowly, with small, circumspect words, as a man tells his mother of a thing he is not yet sure that he is telling, of the steady, soft, warm, low alto that had read aloud each morning at 11 o'clock since December the 18th, and how he had come to wait, between the long case clock's 3rd stroke and the 3rd minute after the hour, for the small step at the South Library door. He did not write what he asked of her by the letter. He did not yet know quite what he asked. He sealed it with the heavy silver Stannersley signet pressed into the warm, dark red wax, addressed it to the Right Honourable the Dowager Countess of Greenbourne at the Greenbourne Dower House in the county of Northampton, and set it upon the silver tray in the front hall for the morning post. He stood beside the tray in the dim lamplight, looking down upon the dark red wax and his own seal. He knew only that he had reached the place at which a man writes to his mother. Mr. Goodwin came noiselessly along the passage, took the silver tray up under his arm, and bore it away. The first weeks of February passed at Stannersley, in a quiet the household had not known for many a winter. The reading at 11 held its hour. The South Library kept its low fire. Mr. Goodwin the butler stood his post. Mrs. Trent, in her dark blue print gown, brought up the small trays of her quiet kindness. Patty Goodwin, with her mid-brown hair beneath her small white lace cap, kept her station by the library door. The 8th Earl of Stannersley, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, gave such orders as required. He gave very few, but news travelled from London upon the post-coach, and what was said in the smoking-room of Brooks in St. James's Street was not kept from Stannersley. It was the head footman, upon an errand to York, who fell into talk with a friend at the inn at Tadcaster, and was given the substance of a story told in the smoking-room of the club. A young earl in the North Country had taken into his house a poor relation in the character of cousin and lady, and a certain Sir Edmund Worsley, the husband of the late earl's daughter, had been heard to give it about that the cousinship was of a freer construction than suited the dignity of the title. The head footman gave the matter to Mr. Goodwin in the butler's pantry on Monday afternoon the 17th, with the door shut and his voice low. Mr. Goodwin, 64, thinning silver-grey hair brushed back, the pale blue eyes lined with that quiet grief which had attended every part of Hermione's 3.5 years in the back court, listened, inclined his head, and dismissed him. Then he went up to the small estate room on the first landing and tapped twice. The 8th Earl, in plain dark country coat and buff waistcoat, the heavy silver signet of the Stag's Head and the stone bridge upon his right hand, sat at the writing table. He looked up. Mr. Goodwin gave the substance plainly, the words used at the club unsoftened. The Earl heard him through. The strong angular face did not alter, the firm grave mouth did not part, the steady considering grey eye held the butler's face. He did not raise his voice. When Mr. Goodwin had done, he was silent some seconds. Then he said in his deep, clear, quiet baritone that he was obliged for the bringing of the matter, that it should not be communicated further, that Lady Hermione was on no account to hear of it, and that he should consider what was to be done. Mr. Goodwin inclined his head and withdrew. The morning of Tuesday the 18th of February broke clear and cold. The mail came up at the usual hour. Mr. Goodwin brought the salver into the small breakfast room where the 8th Earl sat over his coffee, laid the letters at his hand, and withdrew. The 4th was directed in a hand he knew very well, a clear, firm, upright copper plate that had scarcely altered in the 33 years he had had occasion to look upon it, from Greenbourne Dower House, Northamptonshire. He broke the black wax. He read the 3 pages through in silence, his coffee untouched. Then he folded the sheets back and sat a moment with his eye on the white fold. The hand belonged to Lady Olivia Halford, Dowager Countess of Greenbourne, 60, his mother. Soft silver-grey hair beneath the small white lace morning cap, clear, cool, storm-grey eyes, the mirror of her sons, fair, lightly lined skin, kind, firm mouth, slender 5'5", upright, in plain, high-waisted, soft black silk, full mourning for the 7th Earl of Greenbourne, her husband, dead these 3 Easters past, white lace fichu, small black jet brooch at the throat, plain gold wedding band, small pearl drop earrings. The first page gave the news of Greenbourne. The second came to the substance. My dear son, I had not thought to set this down in any letter to you, and yet it has come to me in such a quarter that I cannot pass it by in silence. Lady Sefton, whom I have known from a girl, was lately with me here at Greenbourne for 2 nights upon her road into Lincolnshire, and gave me the substance of a tale going forward at Brooks's these past 10 days, told there, she says, by Sir Edmund Worsley of York. It concerns a young woman in your house at Stannersley, who is given out to be your cousin, and who is, by Sir Edmund's account, of an irregular relation to yourself. I shall not put down here the words he is reported to have used. I write not to charge you, but to ask your own account in your own words, and to beg the indulgence of a visit, that I may come up to Stannersley and see for myself. I do not believe a word Sir Edmund has said in any place at any time, and never have, but I have a duty to your father's name and to your name, and I will discharge it in the only way I know, which is to come and look. Pray write to me at once. The 3rd page was arrangement. The post-chaise from Northamptonshire by way of Doncaster, any day after the 1st of March. Only her woman Susan and her old maid Marshall. No fuss to be made. She closed. Your affectionate mother, Olivia Halford. The 8th Earl, the firm grave mouth set, the storm-grey eye steady, sat some little time over the letter. Then he rose, went up to his estate room, and answered it that hour. He wrote that what Lady Sefton had given her was Sir Edmund Worsley's slander and no other person's, that Lady Hermione Marchmont, his uncle's only niece, had been 3.5 years used as a servant by the housekeeper's settled view, that he had found her so upon his arrival in December, and restored her at once to the position which by birth and name was hers, that she had her own apartments in the south wing and her quarters allowance, and was the Lady of Stannersley by his uncle's name and her own. He wrote he should be glad to receive his mother whensoever she should come, that the rose suite was at her disposal, and that she had only to name the day. He sealed it with the stag's head signet and gave it down for the afternoon mail. At 11 on the morning of Wednesday the 19th, in the South Library, with the small fire low and the thin February light coming in at the great south window, the 8th Earl read his mother's letter aloud to the lady of the house. Hermione, 23, the long, rich, dark, honey-blonde, wavy hair pinned smooth in a low chignon at the nape, the clear, cool, sea-green eyes thick-lashed and steady, the small natural beauty mark below the left corner of her lower lip, in plain pale blue wool morning gown with white lawn fichu and the small silver locket, the small mourning ring of plain gold with the single jetstone on the smallest finger of her right hand, sat in the deep wing chair with her hands quite still. Patty Goodwin, in her plain dark grey print gown, stood at the door with her sewing on the low stool. The Earl read the letter without lifting his eye to her face. When he had done, he folded the sheets, laid them on the small table at his elbow, and sat in silence with his look upon the fire. Hermione drew one slow breath. Then she said in her steady, soft, warm, low alto, only the words, "Your mother is welcome at Stannersley." The Earl turned his head. He looked at her some long moment. The firm grave mouth did not part. The storm-grey eye held her face. Then he inclined his head once, gravely. He went up that hour and added at the foot of his answering letter the line Hermione had given him. "Your mother is welcome at Stannersley." He wrote it in his own hand, beneath his signature, and added, "These are Lady Hermione's words upon the reading of your letter. I send them because they are hers." The post-chaise was looked for from 3 on Friday the 7th of March. The avenue had been swept, the iron gates set wide. The household stood assembled in the great hall, the 8th Earl in plain dark superfine and white cravat at the foot of the principal stair, Hermione at his right at 2 paces in the plain pale blue wool, the dark honey-blonde hair pinned smooth, the small silver locket at the throat, her hands folded quite still. Mr. Goodwin at the hall door, Mrs. Trent, 52, soft grey-brown hair beneath the large white linen cap, warm pale blue eye and kindly mouth, in plain dark blue print gown and white linen apron behind him, Patty Goodwin at her left. The post-chaise came along the avenue at 4:30 and drew up beneath the south portico. Mr. Goodwin stepped down the 3 stone steps, opened the door himself, and let down the step Lady Olivia Halford, Dowager Countess of Greenbourne, 60, soft silver-grey hair under the small white lace travelling cap, clear, cool, storm-grey eyes very steady, kind, firm mouth, in plain black silk, full mourning with white lace fichu and small black jet brooch, plain gold wedding band, small pearl drop earrings, slender 5'5" upright, took his hand and came down. She looked once up at the south front, once across the home park, once at the open hall door. Then she came up the 3 steps on Mr. Goodwin's arm and into the great hall. The 8th Earl inclined. She inclined in return, laid her hand a moment upon his sleeve, and did not speak. She turned her eye upon Hermione where she stood at 2 paces. She looked at the dark honey-blonde hair pinned smooth, the clear, cool, sea-green eyes very steady in the ivory-fair face, the small beauty mark below the lower lip, the plain pale blue wool, the small silver locket, the steady hands. She looked some little time. The clear, cool, storm-grey eye gave nothing. Then she inclined her head once to Hermione, in the proper degree of a dowager countess to a young lady of the house, and said nothing. Hermione inclined her head in return. Her eye did not waver. The dowager turned to her son, and said she should be glad of an hour to herself before dinner. The Earl inclined. Patty went up the principal stair before her to show her the Rose Suite. The door closed at 1 minute before 5. She came down to the small dining parlour at 7 precisely. The three of them sat at the small mahogany dining table with the modest Stannersley service and white wax candles upon the cloth, Mr. Goodwin and a single footman at the sideboard, the Dowager at the head, the Earl at her right, Hermione at her left. The conversation was civil and quiet. The Dowager spoke of the road from Doncaster, of the inn at Wetherby, of the morning's frost, of the parish of Greenbourne. The Earl gave such answers as required. Hermione, when asked, gave hers in the steady, soft, warm, low alto, composed, brief, without performance. The Dowager observed her across the candle flame, the plain, pale blue wool, the white lawn fichu, the small silver locket, the small mourning ring on the smallest finger, the way Hermione's hand held the silver fork as her late mother must have taught her. She observed her son glance once across the candles when Hermione spoke and looked down at his plate again. She herself spoke little. The dinner was not long. At 9 she rose. She withdrew with Hermione for the proper quarter-hour of tea. At 10:30 she retired. The Saturday morning broke grey and still. The Dowager kept her chamber and took a small tray at 1. At 3:30 she came down on her own feet, in the plain black silk full mourning, with the white lace fichu freshened, small black jet brooch, plain gold wedding band, small pearl drop earrings, crossed the great hall, and opened the south library door herself. Hermione, in the plain pale blue wool, was in the deep wing chair by the low fire, with her sewing in her lap. Patty Goodwin sat upon the low stool at the door with her work. Hermione rose. The Dowager raised her hand a small degree, crossed the worn turkey rug, and took the chair opposite at the fire. She turned her clear, cool, storm-grey eye upon Patty, and said in her quietness that she should be obliged if Patty might give her and Lady Hermione the room some little time. She said it with a small kind smile that took the order out of the order. Patty rose, gathered her work, and went out without sound. The fire ticked once. The grey afternoon light fell square through the south window upon the rug. The Dowager sat a moment looking into the fire, then said that she had come because she wished to have some quiet talk with Hermione alone. She would ask plain questions. Hermione might answer as fully or as briefly as she chose. She said it as a request. Hermione inclined her head and said, in the steady, soft, warm, low alto, that she should answer whatever was asked. The Dowager asked her of her father. Hermione gave the matter of Captain Edmund Marchmont of His Majesty's Royal Navy, his service from '95, the frigate stations in the Mediterranean, the action off Cape Trafalgar in October, the year 5, upon the 74-gun ship of the line, in which he had served as second lieutenant, his death there, the small mourning ring given her at 14 by her mother in his memory. The Dowager asked her of her mother. Hermione gave the matter of the late Mrs. Edith Marchmont, a clergyman's daughter of Winchester, married in '93, widowed at 30 in the year 5, kept upon a small naval pension at Compton near Winchester, taken of a fever in the autumn of 13. She gave the long illness and her own attendance upon it. She did not give the harder details, only that her mother had died in the early morning and the parish had been kind. The Dowager asked her of her aunt. Hermione gave it shortly. A Mrs. Pendray of Salisbury, widow of a clergyman of small means, encumbered with 5 children. The establishment could not keep her beyond May of 14. Her uncle, the 7th Earl, had received her at the end of that month. The Dowager asked of the 3.5 years at Stannersley. Hermione gave them. She did not soften, did not embroider. She gave Mrs. Pusey's settled view of genteel kinship without portion, the back court, the laundry, the still-room, the kitchen, the December cold and the dawn hour and the wooden patten and the iron-rimmed bucket, Her uncle's silence and Frances's silence, the death of her uncle in October, and the new Earl's coming in the December dark, and his finding her at the Flagstones at 5:30 upon the morning of the 14th. She told it without performance and without bitterness. The clear, sea-green eye did not waver. The dowager listened in silence. The clear, cool, storm-grey eye did not leave her face. When Hermione had done, she did not speak some seconds. Then she asked, in the same quietness, of Hermione's present feeling toward her son. Hermione looked into the fire some little time, then she lifted her eye and said, in the steady, soft, warm, low alto, that she felt for Lord Stannersley, that gratitude which a person feels for the hand that lifts her from the cold stone, and that respect which a person feels for the carriage of a man who had done a hard right thing without noise, that he had treated her, from the first quarter hour, in the proper degree of her name, that he had asked of her no return of feeling, that she sat with him at 11 each morning to read, and at dinner each evening, and that as to whatever feeling beyond gratitude and respect she might come in time to feel, she was not at this hour in a position to give it any name, and she would not give it a name in this room until she could give it truly. The dowager looked at her some long moment. The clear, cool, storm-grey eye did not alter. The kind, firm mouth was very still. The hour had run out. The small clock on the chimney-piece struck the half-hour after 4. The dowager rose. Hermione rose. The dowager crossed the worn turkey rug at the slow, proper pace, stopped before the wing-chair, and laid her hand a moment, in the old way of an aunt who is not an aunt, upon Hermione's forehead. She said, in her clear, cool, storm-grey-eyed quietness, "Your mother and I were at school together at Mrs. Caulfield's in Ealing in '78, child. I had not known she had a daughter at all until last December. I am very sorry for it. Thank you for taking such care of yourself in this house when there was no one else to do it for you." Hermione did not weep. The clear, cool, sea-green eye held quite steady. She inclined her head deeply, the honey-blonde chignon bending under the dowager's hand. The dowager bent her silver-grey head and kissed her once upon the forehead, lightly. She drew her hand away, crossed the rug, opened the south library door, and withdrew, closing it without sound. The fire ticked once. Hermione stood a long moment by the wing-chair. Then she sat down again, took up her sewing, and laid the needle in. The needle was steady. Dinner that Saturday evening was given again in the small dining parlour at 7. The 8th Earl read aloud through the meal from the second volume of Mansfield Park, the volume open at his left hand upon the cloth. Hermione listened in her steady, composed quietness, the small silver locket catching the candlelight when she breathed, the Dowager Countess of Greenbourne in the plain black silk full mourning, the small black jet brooch and the plain gold wedding band and the small pearl drop earrings, sat at the head and watched her son and Hermione across the candles, and ate without remark. When the volume was set down at the close of the chapter, it being near 9:15, the dowager laid her napkin to the cloth, looked at her son a moment, and said in her clear, cool quietness, "Cassander, you have read aloud at this table for an hour, and you have looked at Lady Hermione 24 times. I shall be in bed at 10. The 8th Earl, the firm grave mouth at its habitual gravity, did not answer. The corner of the mouth lifted a half-quarter inch, no more. He inclined his head to his mother in the proper degree. Hermione did not blush. The small composed mouth did not part. She lifted her eye once to the candle flame and once to the dowager, and inclined her head in her own proper degree, and said nothing whatsoever. The dowager smiled a small dry smile that did not reach the storm-grey eye, but softened the kind firm mouth a quarter inch, and rose. The gentleman rose. Hermione rose. She went up to the rose suite at 1 minute after 10. The door closed upon her. The post-chaise was at the south portico at noon upon Sunday the 9th of March. The day was thin and high-clouded. The household assembled as upon Friday. Mr. Goodwin opened the chaise door and let down the step. The Dowager Countess of Greenbourne, in plain black silk full mourning, under her grey wool travelling cloak, the small white lace travelling cap, the storm-grey eye clear and quiet, came down the 3 steps on her son's offered arm. She turned at the carriage step. She kissed her son once upon the cheek. She did not speak. She turned to Hermione, who stood at 2 paces in the plain, pale blue wool with the small silver locket. She inclined her head in the same degree to a 1/4 inch she had used on the Friday. But the clear, cool, storm-grey eye, when it rested a moment upon Hermione's face, was not the eye that had looked at her on the Friday. There was a difference Hermione could not at that moment have named, nor described to a third person, but it was a thing she carried in memory afterwards, and it told her she had been looked at, this second time, by a woman who had decided. The dowager mounted into the chaise. The door closed. The horses were given the word. The chaise drove away down the avenue between the bare beech trunks at the slow, proper pace, and at the iron gates turned south upon the York Road, and was gone. The 8th Earl of Stannersley stood at the great south window of the South Library that Sunday afternoon and watched the post-chaise out of the avenue. Hermione was not in the room. The fire ticked low. The worn turkey rug lay quiet at his feet. The thin overcast lay grey above the home park. He stood a long moment, his hand at rest upon the embrasure, the silver signet of the stag's head upon his finger, the storm-grey eye following the dark blue panel of the chaise through the iron gates and out of sight along the south road. The chimes of the small cabinet clock struck 1. He turned from the window, crossed the rug, and laid his hand upon the back of the chair at the small writing table by the south wall, looking down a moment at the green cuff commonplace book closed upon the leather. He drew the chair out, sat down, and took up the pen. The 3rd week of March came in upon Stannersley with a thin, uncertain sun and a steady wind out of the northwest. The ground was no longer iron, but it had not yet softened. The gardeners had begun the slow work of the spring borders. The 8th Earl of Stannersley, 33, had risen at 6:30 on the Tuesday morning of the 18th, ridden out alone for an hour, breakfasted with his cousin at 9, and gone afterwards to his small estate room beyond the South Library to read over the half-yearly accounts. He had not been at the accounts above an hour and a quarter when the muffled sound of horse-hoofs upon the gravel of the front sweep came up to him, and Mr. Goodwin's tread fell upon the long boards of the south corridor. A small, respectful knock. "Come!" Mr. Goodwin opened the door. Behind him stood Mr. Greasley of York, the Stannersley family solicitor of 49 years. Thinning silver-grey hair, carefully combed back, steady grey eyes behind small gold-rimmed spectacles, fair indoor pallor, touched at the cheekbones from the cold ride. Long, narrow scholar's face, clean-shaven, tall, thin frame with its slight, habitual stoop, plain black superfine riding coat over a black silk waistcoat with small jet buttons, white cravat, charcoal pantaloons, polished black boots marked with the road dust. He carried his small leather portfolio under his left arm and his plain dark brown beaver hat in his right hand. It was 10:30 precisely. "Mr. Greasley, my lord," said Mr. Goodwin, and stood aside. "Mr. Greasley." Cassandra rose and put out his hand. "You will have ridden hard." "From York at 6:30, my lord. The roads are in passable case." "Goodwin, send up a tray. Mr. Greasley, sit. Read me what has come." The solicitor inclined, seated himself on the small straight-backed chair, and produced a single sheet of folded paper. He passed it across. "From whom?" "From a Mr. Pugh of York, my lord. Solicitor of moderate practice. The letter is written upon the instruction of Sir Edmund Worsley." Cassandra broke the seal. He read the sheet through once, in silence, his clear, cool, storm-grey eyes moving steadily down the page. The one premature streak of pure silver above the right temple was very plain in the morning light. The one lock of pure black, wavy hair was fallen across the brow. He did not change countenance. The letter proposed, in formal terms, to take the new Earl's irregular treatment of his cousin into the Chancery Court unless a settlement of £2,000 were paid into Sir Edmund's hand for the inconvenience caused to the family name. He laid it upon the green leather and folded his hands upon it and spoke in his deep, clear, quiet baritone. "Mr. Greasley, write back the same hour, recite the standing arrears upon the Worsley estate, by your last reckoning £3,500, the unpaid account between Mr. Pugh of York and his lordship, some 100 guineas as best you can establish. The case of Pennell against Lord Esbridge of last Easter term, upon the Court of Chancery's discretion not to entertain bills filed upon the credit of an insolvent peer, and add that any bill in Chancery his lordship may cause to be filed will be answered by his Grace's solicitors at his cost, and that, if Sir Edmund persists, I shall lay the entire matter, including the late 7th Earl's settled treatment of his only niece between 1813 and 1816, before Lord Chancellor Eldon at the next term." The solicitor took up his steel pen and wrote. He had taken down the dictation in full, in the careful clerk's hand. He read it back. He drew the page fair upon a second sheet, and brought the fair copy to the writing table. And Cassander dipped his uncle's old steel pen once in the Standish, signed his name, and laid the pen across the rim of the inkwell. Mr. Greasley folded the sheet, sealed it with a wafer, and addressed the cover to Mr. Pugh of York at his rooms in Coney Street. Mrs. Trent's tray came up. The solicitor drank the small glass of Madeira, and ate the bread and cheese with the unhurried dispatch of a man who had ridden 4 hours and would ride again. At 3, the Stannersley footboy carried the sealed cover down to the village and into the hand of the guard upon the York coach. The coach went up the road and over the hill, and was gone. The afternoon went very quietly. The Earl read the second of the half-yearly accounts. Lady Hermione Marchmont sat at her embroidery frame in the South Library, the low, warm Yorkshire sun moving slowly along the calf-bound spines above her shoulder. The house was still. The Wednesday following, the post came in from York with the bag at the back door, and Mr. Goodwin carried up the single wafered cover at 20 minutes to 10 and laid it at the Earl's elbow at the breakfast parlour table, where Cassander was reading his cousin a paragraph from the Yorkshire Gazette concerning the new turnpike at Ripon. He broke the seal and read it through. It was a single line, in a different hand from the first. Mr. Pugh of York, to Mr. Greasley of York. Sir, I am desired to inform you that this firm has been retained no further by Sir Edmund Worsley upon the failure of his lordship's account, and I have nothing further to communicate. I have the honour to be, sir, your most obedient, humble servant, J. Pugh. The wafer was plain. The hand was a clerk's hand. Cassander folded the sheet and laid it upon the table beside his cup, and went on with the paragraph from the Gazette in the same even tone. Hermione, sea-green eyes lifted once across the table, did not ask. He finished the paragraph. He set down the paper. He said in his quiet baritone, "It is over, cousin." She inclined her head, the dark honey-blonde wisps stirring at her temple in the warm air from the breakfast-room fire, and said, in her steady, soft, warm, low alto, "I am very glad, my lord." After breakfast, Mr. Goodwin laid the sheet within the small black tin dispatch box in the estate-room. The threat that Sir Edmund Worsley had carried up to Brooks's the February before had drawn its single thin line of ink upon the second hand at York, and had ceased. The Sunday of the 23rd of March was bright and cold, with a thin, clear sunlight upon the limestone weather of the parish church of St. Oswald, Stannersley village. The bell began at 20 minutes to 11. The Stannersley carriage drew up at the Lich Gate at 1:30, and the 8th Earl and his cousin were handed down by the footboy and went up between the leaning yew trees to the south door. Hermione wore her plain dark blue Sunday gown of soft fine wool, high-waisted with long sleeves, and a small white linen ruff at the throat, beneath the soft grey silk bonnet with its plain charcoal grey ribbon, and the plain dark grey wool pelisse with the black velvet collar. Her gloved hands held a small black-bound prayer book. The dark honey-blonde wavy hair was pinned smooth in the low chignon at the nape, with 2 small wisps escaped at the temples. The ivory fair skin had taken the small fresh colour of the morning ride. The small natural beauty mark, just below the left corner of her lower lip, was very plain in the cool churchyard light. Cassander, in his plain dark Sunday coat and white cravat, gave her his arm at the lich gate. The Reverend Hawthorne, in his black cassock and white surplice, came down the choir to greet them at the pew door. He bowed once, silver crucifix on the black silk cord, steady at his breast. Hermione gave him her hand and went in. The bell ceased. The service began. She read the responses in the small, clear, inward voice of a young woman who had read aloud to her dying mother. The sermon was upon the patience of Job, and was kindly. They came out at 12:05. The Wednesday morning of the 26th was very still, with a faint grey light upon the south library, and a small new fire upon the marble hearth at 8:30. And from 11 o'clock until 1:20 the Earl and his cousin read together quietly in the south library, Hermione in the wing chair opposite his own, with the small cloth-bound Tacitus open upon her knee, Patty Goodwin attendant at the door with her small piece of plain hemming. They read the 11th book of the Annals through the long, quiet morning, Hermione translating the hard places aloud as she came to them in the steady, soft, warm, low alto that Cassander had now heard through 3 months of mornings. The small hush of the room broken only by the fall of a coal upon the hearth, and the small soft turn of a page. They closed the book at the 1:15. After the cold collation, they walked an hour and 20 minutes in the home park. Hermione spoke of the early primroses that had begun in the bank below the wood, Cassander of the mare he had chosen at York for her on the Friday before, both of small things, neither of any large thing. He returned with her to the South Library at 3:30. He saw her seated with her embroidery frame in the small chair at the south window. He bowed. He went out. In the small estate room beyond the South Library, the door shut, the curtain drawn a little against the low slant of the afternoon sun upon the writing table, he unlocked the small drawer at his left hand and took out his late uncle's small green calf commonplace book. Dark green calf worn at the 4 corners, the small initials of the late 7th Earl, very faintly stamped in faded gilt upon the front cover. He laid it before him. He opened the standish. He took up the steel pen, dipped it, drew the small inkwell to his right hand. He turned to a fresh, blank leaf at the back of the book. He sat a moment without writing, the lock of black wavy hair fallen across the brow. He began, very slowly, in the even careful hand his old tutor had drilled into him at 14, the first lines of the proposal he intended to make. He wrote 2 lines. He paused. He read them. He set the pen down. After a while he took up the pen again, drew a single careful line through the second line, and wrote a different second line above it. He shut the book gently upon the half-written page. He laid the pen across the rim of the inkwell. He locked the drawer. He turned the small brass key. The Tuesday of the 1st of April brought a single letter by the morning post from the Worsley house at York. The cover was addressed in a careful Italian hand. The wafer was Lady Frances Worsley's small green wafer with the Worsley arms. Mr. Goodwin laid it at the Earl's elbow at the breakfast parlour at 9:25. Cassander broke the seal and read it through. It was, in its way, a perfectly civil letter. Lady Frances Worsley, glossy chestnut-brown hair under her fashionable lace cap, large pale grey eyes set in their habitual settled snobberies, alabaster fair, lightly powdered skin, a little drawn now, had written 3 short paragraphs upon the spring weather at York, upon her own indifferent health, and upon the hope that her cousin's lordship had been well at Stannersley. She did not name her husband. She did not name Hermione. She had signed it, "Your affectionate cousin, F. Worsley." Cassandra read it through twice. He folded it. He did not pass it across the table. He laid it within his coat pocket and went on with the breakfast, and after breakfast went up to the estate room and put the letter within the small black tin dispatch box and shut the lid and turned the small brass key. He did not, that day, write a reply. He did not write a reply upon the Wednesday. The letter remained unanswered, and was not, in the event, ever answered. The civility of his cousin Francis had come too late for any small open hand of his to receive it. The Thursday morning of the 3rd of April was warm, with a small soft clear sunlight upon the south front, and the first true mildness of the spring upon the home park and the village road. He had the bay mare out at 9:30. He rode down at the small, steady walking pace through the village street to the parsonage of Stannersley, the small grey stone house behind its low wall and its 3 yews at the south end of the village. He drew up at the parsonage gate at 20 minutes past 10. The Reverend Hawthorne's housekeeper, Mrs. Cobb, opened the door and curtsied and showed him through to the small, low study at the back of the house. The Reverend Hawthorne was at his small writing table at the gable window, 58 years old, soft, sandy grey hair, finely thinning at the crown, clear, honest hazel eyes behind the small gold-rimmed spectacles, fair, gently weathered skin lined kindly at the corners of the eyes and mouth, long, kind face, clean-shaven, medium 5'10" thin frame with its small, habitual slight stoop, plain black country cassock, white collar band, the small silver crucifix on its black silk cord, steady at the breast above the white linen of his stock. He rose. He came round the writing table. He took the Earl's hand and pressed it once. "My lord, sit, sit. You will take a glass of the elderflower. Mrs. Cobb, the tray." They sat at the small fire. They spoke first of the parish, of the new pew for the Hartleys at the back of the south aisle, of the church roof at the north transept, where the lead had loosened in the November gale, of the small charity for the widow Bell. They spoke of the long-neglected tomb of the 3rd Earl in the Lady Chapel. They spoke for the better part of 3/4 of an hour upon parish matters at their unhurried pace. Then a small, quiet pause. The Earl set his glass upon the small side table at his elbow. "Mr. Hawthorne, a separate matter." The clergyman bowed his head, the small gold rim of the spectacles catching the firelight. "My lord, I wish to ascertain that the form is open at St. Oswald's for the ordinary calling of banns at the morning service upon 3 consecutive Sundays in the spring." "It is, my lord, as it has been at every spring of the parish these 34 years, since I came to it." The clergyman, in his quiet country voice behind the small gold-rimmed spectacles. "My lord, 34 years I have been a parish clergyman. I have married 67 couples in this church. I shall be very glad to put up the banns of any couple you may name." Cassandra inclined. "I am obliged to you, Mr. Hawthorne. I shall write, when the time is come." "My lord." He rose at 20 minutes past noon. The clergyman walked with him to the gate. The mare took him back up the village street in the warm, clear noon. He came in at the south door at 5 minutes past 1. The day went forward. He read with Hermione in the south library between 3 and the dressing bell. He dined with her in the small dining parlour at 6. They sat in the south drawing-room till 9, Hermione at the small pianoforte, playing the slow pieces of Mr. Haydn at her own grave quietness. The Earl in the wing-chair by the fire with the small folio of Bishop Berkeley open upon his knee. At 9, The tea tray came up. At 10, she gave him her hand at the door of the south corridor and went up to her apartments. He stood a moment at the foot of the great stair and watched her go up the curve of the polished oak till the small white hand was lost upon the dark blue figured silk of the upper landing. He turned. He went back into the south library. It was 11 o'clock at night, by the long case clock in the great hall, when he sat down at the long mahogany writing table at the second window of the south library and drew the branch of beeswax candles to his right hand and lit one branch of 3. The fire on the marble hearth was at its low red ember. The room was warm. Mrs. Trent, the cook, 52, soft grey-brown hair pinned beneath the large white linen evening cap, warm pale blue eyes lined kindly at the corners, fair pink-cheeked round face, kindly mouth, plump medium frame in her plain dark blue print cotton evening gown beneath the large white linen apron, the white kerchief at the throat, had brought up his small tray of the evening tea at 10 and gone down. Patty Goodwin had drawn the curtains and put the small fresh log upon the embers and gone to her bed. The house was still. Cassander Edmund Halford, 8th Earl of Stannersley, 33, sat at the long mahogany writing table, the thick, deep black wavy hair, pure black, with dark blue lights in the small, steady candle flame, brushing the collar of his black, superfine evening tailcoat, the one premature streak of pure silver above the right temple, very plain at this hour, the one lock fallen across the brow, the clear, cool, storm-grey eyes lowered upon the green calf cover of the small book in his hand, the fair, faintly weathered skin clean-shaven at the strong, angular jaw, the small, thin, pale scar across the right eyebrow from the fall down the teak stair at Madras in 1812, no jewel of his life. Very faint in the candlelight, the firm, grave mouth at composed quiet, the small dark mole at the right corner of the lower lip, the tall, lean, broad-shouldered, 6'2" frame, easy in the high carved back of his uncle's old oak writing chair. He wore the black, superfine evening tailcoat, the white cravat carefully tied at the throat, the black silk waistcoat with its small jet buttons, the charcoal evening pantaloons, the polished black Hessian boots, the heavy silver Stannersley signet of the stag's head over the stone bridge, sat upon the third finger of his right hand. He took from the locked drawer at his left hand his late uncle's small green calf commonplace book, dark green calf worn at the 4 corners. He laid it upon the green leather of the table. He turned to a fresh blank leaf at the back. He opened the Standish. He took up the steel pen, dipped it once, tried it once upon the corner of the spare sheet at his elbow, and drafted, in the even, careful hand his old tutor had drilled into him at 14, the proposal he intended to make on the Saturday morning at 11 o'clock. He wrote it through once slowly, the small, steady pen stroke moving across the page, the small, soft scrape of the steel nib, the only sound in the room. He read it through. He sat a moment. He took up the pen again, drew a careful line through 3 words upon the 3rd line, set 3 other words above them in the small interlinear hand of his copybook, and read it through again. He turned the leaf. He took a fresh blank page. He wrote it out again. Fair in the even careful hand, the 3 new words now in their proper place. He read the fair copy through once. He laid the pen across the rim of the inkwell. He sat a long moment with the page open before him. Across the table, the wing chair where Hermione had sat at the morning hour stood empty, the small embroidered cushion at its back a little dented from the line of her shoulder, the small cloth-bound Tacitus on the side table beside it, with the slip of paper at the place. The candlelight moved once upon the cushion. He shut the small green calf commonplace book. He returned it to the drawer. He turned the small brass key. He put out the first candle of the branch, with the small silver snuffer at his right hand. He took up the second candle in its small silver chamber stick, and stood a long minute with the small steady flame in his hand, looking once more, across the long mahogany writing table, at the wing chair opposite his own, at the small dent in the embroidered cushion, at the small cloth-bound Tacitus and the slip of paper at the place. The fire ember on the marble hearth gave its small, low red light. The candle gave its small, steady, pale yellow light. The high leaded windows were dark. The long black moor beyond them was still. He drew one slow breath. He went to the side door that gave upon the small private stair to his own apartments. He set his hand upon the latch. He looked back once. He passed through. The latch settled with its small soft click. The small private stair received the small steady tread of his slippered foot. The candlelight went up the stair with him, and was gone. The Yorkshire night was quiet beyond the leaded windows of the South Library. The house was still. The long case clock in the great hall struck the 1/4 midnight, the small clear tones falling evenly and being lost upon the dark. Saturday morning came in cold pale blue and clear over the Yorkshire moor, the thin April sun laying a band of pale gold along the eastern edge of the home park. The clock in the front hall struck 11. The fire in the South Library was settled to a steady, deep red bed of coals beneath one fresh log. Cassander Edmund Halford, 8th Earl of Stannersley, 33, tall, lean, broad-shouldered, 6'2", his thick, deep black wavy hair brushed back, with the one premature streak of pure silver above the right temple, and the one lock fallen across the brow. His clear, cool, storm-grey eyes, very steady, came into the South Library 1/4 minute before the clock struck, and stood upon the worn Turkey rug. He was dressed plainly. Dark, walnut-brown country coat of fine, superfine, buff waistcoat with small horn buttons, buff breeches, brown-topped riding boots, white cravat properly tied, the heavy silver Stannersley signet on his right hand. He had carried in his coat pocket the small green calf commonplace book in which he had drafted, twice the previous night, the asking he meant to make. Lady Hermione Marchmont, 23, slender, 5'5" upright, her long, rich, dark, honey-blonde, wavy hair, pinned smooth in its low chignon, with the small wisps escaped at the temples, her clear, cool, sea-green eyes lifted at his step, her ivory fair English skin, with the faint scattering of pale freckles across the bridge of the nose, and the small natural beauty mark below the left corner of the lower lip, very plain in the cold, pale blue April light, was risen from the wing chair. She wore a plain, high-waisted, soft, pale blue wool morning gown, with long sleeves and a white lawn fichu at the throat. The small silver locket on its thin black silk ribbon lay quiet beneath the fichu. Her late mother's small pearl drop earrings were in her ears. Her late father's small gold mourning ring with its single jetstone was on the smallest finger of her right hand. Her hands were very still at her sides. Patty Goodwin, 18, slender, 5'2" upright, her soft mid-brown hair smooth beneath the small white lace cap, her clear hazel eyes lowered upon her plain mending in the rush-seated chair by the door, paused her needle. She had been told the night before by Mr. Goodwin, her uncle, to remain quietly and bear silent witness, and the small quiet pride of being trusted kept her needle suspended above the white linen and her breath very even. Cassander crossed the worn Turkey rug to within 2 paces of where Hermione stood. He did not take her hand. He looked at her once full in the face. Then he went down upon his right knee on the worn Turkey rug and looked up at her steady from there. He spoke in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, even and unhurried. Lady Hermione, I had not been at Stannersley 4 hours when I came round the back court arch on the cold black morning of the 14th of December, and found you on your knees at the Flagstones. I have loved you with what dignity I could since the breath in which you gave me your name. I am asking, on the proper terms, in the South Library at 11 o'clock on the cold, pale blue Saturday morning of the 5th of April, 1817, with Patty Goodwin present, that you will do me the honour of becoming my wife. The library held its small quiet. The fire shifted once. Patty Goodwin's needle did not move. Hermione's clear, cool, sea-green eyes did not leave his. The faint, warm rose flush rose along her cheekbones once and settled there. She let 4 small, composed breaths pass between his last word and her first. Then she said, in her soft, warm, low alto, perfectly steady, "My lord, I shall." Cassandra rose from his knee. He took her ungloved right hand between both of his, very carefully, and he bent his deep black head and laid his mouth, only once, only briefly, against the back of her ivory-fair fingers above the small gold mourning ring of her late father. Then he straightened. He set her hand back at her side with the same care. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I shall do my best by you, Hermione." "I know it, my lord," she said, and her sea-green eyes were very bright but did not spill. Patty Goodwin set one small, careful stitch into the white linen, and then another, and her clear hazel eyes were wet beneath the white lace cap, and she bent her head a little lower over her work and was silent. He brought her down to the morning room a quarter of an hour later. Mr. Goodwin, 64, tall, thin, upright, his thinning silver-grey hair brushed back, his pale blue eyes finely lined steady above the long, kind, clean-shaven face, in his plain black butler's tailcoat with the small black silk mourning band on the left arm, was waiting at the door. Mrs. Trent, 52, medium plump, her soft grey-brown hair pinned beneath the large white linen cap, her warm, pale blue eyes lifted, her fair pink-cheeked round face attentive, in her plain dark blue print cotton cook's gown beneath the large white linen apron, stood beside him. Patty Goodwin, in her plain dark grey print cotton housemaid's gown, came down the corridor at the half-hour and stood at her uncle's left. Cassandra set Hermione's right hand upon his own left arm. He did not let it go. "Mr. Goodwin, Mrs. Trent, Patty, Lady Hermione has this morning done me the great honour of consenting to become my wife." Mr. Goodwin did not start. He inclined his long, kind face, once in the proper inclination of a senior household servant. His finely lined, pale blue eyes rested a moment upon Hermione's face, with the quiet grief of 3.5 winters, in them gone over now into a quiet peace. "My lord," he said, in the steady, low voice he kept for serious matters. Her ladyship's late uncle would have wished it. Mrs. Trent's warm, pale blue eyes filled at once. She lifted the corner of the white linen apron and dabbed once, quickly, at her right eye, and then she lowered the apron and looked at Hermione full in the face. "Bless you, my lord," she said. "Bless you, my lady." Patty Goodwin smiled small and quiet beneath her white lace cap, her clear hazel eyes downcast, her small slender hands folded before her white linen apron. Cassandra asked Mr. Goodwin to inform the rest of the staff before the dressing bell at 6. Mrs. Trent went down to her kitchen. Patty Goodwin returned to the South Library to attend her ladyship. Hermione, on Cassandra's arm still, walked with him to the South Terrace and looked once across the cold, pale blue Yorkshire morning to the bare elms and did not speak for some minutes, and he did not press her. He went up to his dressing room at 3 that afternoon and wrote in the firm, small, slanted hand he had learned at Madras to his mother. He told her plainly he had this morning asked Lady Hermione Marchmont to become his wife, and she had accepted him. He begged her, if it should be convenient, to come up to Stannersley by post-chaise as soon as she was able, that she might meet Hermione for the second time as her son's affianced wife. He sealed it with the silver Stannersley signet in dark red wax, and gave it to Mr. Goodwin for the post rider. The dowager's reply came by return at 4 on Monday. She would come the following day. She arrived by hired post-chaise from the King's Head at Wetherby on Tuesday, April the 8th at 3. The South Library at 3:30 on Tuesday, April 8th was warm with a fresh laid fire. The cold, pale blue April light gone gold. Lady Olivia Halford, Dowager Countess of Greenbourne, 60, slender 5'5" upright, her soft silver-grey hair smooth beneath a small white lace morning cap, her clear, cool, storm-grey eyes, the mirror of her son's bright above the fair, lightly lined skin. In her plain, high-waisted, soft black silk, full morning gown with white lace fichu and the small black jet brooch at the throat, came in upon Cassandra's arm and stopped 2 paces inside the door and looked at Hermione. Hermione, in the same plain pale blue wool morning gown, with the white lawn fichu and the small silver locket beneath, had risen from the wing chair. She inclined her honey-blonde head once, quiet and composed. The dowager's storm-grey eyes filled once, briefly, and one tear stood and fell down her cheek before she could lift the small black-bordered cambric handkerchief to it. And as she dabbed it away, she laughed. A small, surprised, soft, low laugh that was half a sob and wholly a blessing, and she came forward and took Hermione by both hands and held them. "Forgive me, child," she said. "I had thought I was past weeping at anything good. I find I am not." She set upon the writing-table at Hermione's elbow a small red velvet case, scuffed at the corners with long use, and she opened it, and the late 7th Countess of Greenbourne's old garnet and gold parure lay in the worn velvet, small dark red garnet drops in fine gold for the ears, a garnet and gold pendant on a fine gold chain for the throat, a garnet-set bracelet of fine gold links, the deep wine red of the stones quiet against the cream-coloured velvet. "These were my mother's," the dowager said. "I had thought to leave them upon my own death. I see no reason to wait. Wear them, Hermione, on your wedding day." The banns were read at St. Oswald's Parish Church in Stannersley Village by the Reverend Hawthorne. 58, medium 5'10", thin slight stoop, his soft sandy grey hair finely thinning at the crown, his clear, honest hazel eyes behind small, gold-rimmed spectacles, his long, kind, clean-shaven face, in black cassock with white linen surplice and small silver crucifix on black silk cord, on the Sundays of April the 13th, the 20th, and the 27th. On the first Sunday, he stood in the small, pale, Yorkshire stone Norman chancel before the simple oak altar and read the names plain in his quiet country voice: Cassandra Edmund Halford, bachelor of this parish, 8th Earl of Stannersley, and Hermione Marchmont, spinster of this parish, and asked the customary question. And the congregation sat very quiet, and not one voice rose to object. By the second Sunday, the parish women had begun to bring small tied posies of pale yellow primroses and dark blue forget-me-nots up the narrow flagged aisle and lay them about the altar steps. 2 on the Sunday of the 20th, 4 on the Sunday of the 27th, bright in the warm, pale yellow Yorkshire spring light through the narrow lancet windows. The third Sunday went by quiet and without objection. The small parish settled itself for the wedding to come, Saturday, May. The third, 1817, came in warm and pale yellow and clean over the moor, the sun risen at 5 and laying its warm gold along the south wall of the small 12th century Yorkshire church of St. Oswald in Stannersley Village. Pale Yorkshire stone, low square Norman tower, plain oak pews polished by 7 centuries of Sunday hands, narrow lancet windows admitting the warm, pale yellow Yorkshire spring light in long, quiet bands across the flagged aisle. At every pew end hung a small posy of pale yellow primroses and dark blue forget-me-nots and white spring narcissus tied with white silk ribbon. 2 tall brass candlesticks stood upon the simple oak altar, bearing 2 lit beeswax candles, the small flames steady. The chancel was full of primrose and forget-me-not in the worn pewter altar vases. The whole village had come. The household side filled with Stannersley estate, the village side with the small farms, the smithy, the post house, the schoolmaster, the parish women in their best Sunday print gowns, the men in plain Sunday black, the children scrubbed and quiet. The Reverend Hawthorne stood at the altar in his black cassock and white linen surplice and small silver crucifix on its black silk cord, his small leather-bound book of the offices open in his hands. Cassandra stood within the chancel rail in black, superfine wedding tailcoat, high white starched cravat, white silk waistcoat with very faint silver pinstripe, black satin knee breeches, white silk stockings, buckled black evening shoes, the heavy silver Stannersley signet on his right hand, a single small sprig of pale yellow primrose pinned at his lapel, the plain black crepe mourning band still on his left arm at 6 months for his late uncle. His clear, cool, storm-grey eyes were upon the western door. The bells of St. Oswald's rang the 3/4 hour. The western door opened. Mr. Greasley, Stannersley family solicitor, 49, tall, thin, slight stoop, 6 foot, his thinning silver-grey hair carefully combed back, his steady grey eyes behind small gold-rimmed spectacles, his long, narrow scholar's face composed in plain black superfine and white cravat, stood at the western door in loco parentis, in the place of Hermione's nearer kin, who had none living. Hermione came up the flagged aisle on Mr. Greasley's offered arm in the long, quiet bands of warm, pale yellow Yorkshire, spring light. Her long, rich, dark, honey-blonde, wavy hair, ash gold lights kindling in the lancet sun, was dressed in a smooth, low chignon, beneath a small coronet of pale yellow primroses and dark blue forget-me-nots. The heirloom Halford 1789 wedding veil was pinned to the coronet and lay over her shoulders without hiding the oval composed face beneath, the clear cool sea-green eyes very steady upon Cassandra, the ivory fair English skin with the faint warm rose flush along the cheekbones and the faint freckles across the nose and the small natural beauty mark below the left corner of the lower lip plain in the warm gold light, her soft well-shaped mouth quiet, slender 5'5", upright. She wore a high-waisted ivory silk wedding gown with short puff sleeves and a single narrow row of small antique seed pearls at the hem, long plain ivory silk gloves to the elbow, the late Countess of Greenbourne's garnet and gold parure, small dark red garnet drops at her ears, the garnet and gold pendant at the throat, the garnet set bracelet over the right glove, the deep wine-red warm in the lancet sun, her late mother's pearl drop earrings she had set aside that morning, her late father's small gold mourning ring she'd kept on the smallest finger of her right hand beneath the glove, the small silver locket on its thin black silk ribbon she wore beneath the bodice as always. The Dowager Countess of Greenbourne, having stepped out of her full mourning for this one day at her own decision, stood in the chancel as matron of honour in plain high-waisted, soft, pale cream silk morning gown with white lace fichu, her plain gold wedding band, her small pearl drop earrings, her white lace morning cap, her soft silver-grey hair smooth beneath it, her clear, cool, storm-grey eyes very bright upon the bride. In the front pew of the household side, Mrs. Trent, in her soft Sunday black silk gown, beneath a fresh white linen Sunday cap. Beside her, Mr. Goodwin in his plain black butler's tailcoat, with the small black silk mourning band still on the left arm. Behind them, Patty Goodwin in her best dark grey Sunday gown, beneath a fresh white lace cap. The Reverend Hawthorne read the marriage service from his small leather-bound book in his quiet country voice. Cassander, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, took Hermione Marchmont to be his wedded wife. Hermione, in her soft, warm, low alto, perfectly steady, took Cassander Edmund Hallford to be her wedded husband. The plain gold wedding band, chosen plainly by Cassander himself at York the Tuesday before, was set by him upon the smallest finger of Hermione's left hand over the long, plain ivory silk glove. She lifted her sea-green eyes to him as he set it on. He held them there. The Reverend Hawthorne closed his small, leather-bound book. The bells of St. Oswald's rang the half-hour above the warm, pale yellow Yorkshire moor. The whole small parish stood and was very quiet for the space of one full breath, and the wedding was done. The wedding breakfast was set in the long dining room at Stannersley Hall, under the long mahogany table, dressed in fresh white linen and laid with small glass posies of pale yellow primrose and dark blue forget-me-not. Mrs. Trent's plain English fruit-cake stood at the centre under its pale Yorkshire icing on a tall silver-mounted cake stand. The dowager rose at the head of the table at noon and gave her composed small grace. She said only that she had loved her son well from his hour of being given to her, and that she found this morning that she loved his wife already with an equal mother's love. And she sat down. Mr. Greasley rose and gave the country toast to the new Earl and Countess of Stannersley, to long life, to good harvest, to a quiet hearth. And the wedding party drank it standing. The bride and groom walked the long gallery at 3. The warm, pale yellow May light came down from the south windows in long bands across the worn parquet. The portraits of 7 prior earls watched from the north wall. He set her gloved hand upon his arm. She did not let it fall. October the 27th, 1818 came in warm and gold and quiet over Yorkshire. At 8:30 on the warm gold autumn evening, the South Library at Stannersley held a steady fire of seasoned oak on the hearth, the deep red bed of coals settling itself in slow, bright stages. Mrs. Trent's plain seed cake stood on a small white plate on the small writing table between the 2 chairs by the fire, with 2 cups of fresh, strong tea beside it. In the wing chair on the hearth side sat the 8th Countess of Stannersley, her long, rich, dark, honey-blonde, wavy hair pinned smooth in its low chignon, with the small wisps escaped at the temples catching the fire gold, her clear, cool, sea-green eyes lowered upon the small, cloth-bound book. Her ivory, fair English skin and the faint, pale freckles across the bridge of the nose and the small natural beauty mark below the left corner of her lower lip warm in the firelight, her soft, well-shaped mouth shaping the words quiet as she read. She wore a warm amber silk evening gown with long sleeves and white lace fichu at the throat, the small silver locket on its thin black silk ribbon upon the fichu, her late mother's small pearl drop earrings in her ears, the plain gold wedding band on the smallest finger of her left hand. The small cloth-bound book was Miss Austen's Persuasion, lately published. In the chair opposite, his deep black, wavy hair, with its one premature silver streak above the right temple, and its one lock fallen across the brow, catching the fire gold, his clear, cool, storm-grey eyes upon her face as she read, his madras-weathered fair skin warm in the firelight, his large, quiet hands folded loose upon his knee, sat Cassander, 8th Earl of Stannersley, listening. The fire settled itself once. The great house was quiet beyond the closed library door. She read on in her soft, warm, low alto. He listened. There are stories that begin with a kiss. There are stories that begin with a vow. There are stories that begin with a knock, and stories that begin with a hired post-chaise, and stories that begin with a Tacitus on a stone bench, and stories that begin with a tortoise-shell cat asleep upon an embroidered cushion. And there are, humbler, harder, of more enduring shape, Stories that begin with the sound of a stiff brush dragging once, twice, 3 times across the dried black currant stain on a broad York stone flagstone in the cold black December of a Yorkshire back court at 5:30 in the morning, with the iron rim of a wooden bucket glazed thin with white frost, and the breath of a young woman of clear genteel carriage standing in slow white plumes about her quiet face, and a single oil lamp burning dim and yellow in the kitchen window above her shoulder, and no moon. Stories whose first scene is not a ballroom nor a moor top, but a back court in the iron December dark, and a brush, and a flagstone, and a young woman who has been 3.5 winters at her work, and not been heard of by any kinsman living, and a man of 33 who has come round the back court arch by the patient agency of his late uncle's death and his own quiet conscience, and stopped short at what he found there. Such stories take longest in the asking, and longest in the answering, and they ask of their man not the brilliance of a season, but the steady patience of a winter, a spring, and the long, slow turning of a year into a wedding morning. Such stories are the ones the great houses keep quiet upon their long galleries, and the ones the old butlers carry in the finely lined corners of their pale blue eyes to the end of their days. And so, on the warm, pale yellow Saturday morning of the 3rd of May, 1817, in the parish church of St. Oswald in Stannersley village, under the soft Yorkshire spring sun, Lady Hermione Marchmont, who had been taken in at 19 by the uncle who had set her to scrub his flagstones for 3.5 years, became, by the patient, steady asking of the new Earl, who had walked round the back court arch at 5:30 on a cold black December morning, and taken the brush from her hand, the 8th Countess of Stannersley and the cousin his late uncle, in dying, had given him without speaking.